Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. The Middle East is on fire. Israel is stealing, killing, and taking more land. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, they put the terrorists in power. Now they want to pretend like they're fighting the terrorists. Very disgusting. What the Zionists and Trump, see Trump down with this.
Zionist occupation is currently intensifying its bombing on Damascus, brutally targeting Gilani's government buildings in the Syrian capital. The Israeli defense minister stated that the warning messages in Damascus are over, and now the painful attacks have begun, Kat said. Local Syrian media released videos from various camera angles today.
This is all about stealing more Syrian land for Israel. This is the Greater Israel Project. Remember, they got to steal this land, steal the land from Lebanon, steal some Iraqi land, take some land from Jordan. You see, all this was a play the whole time. And Trump put his blessings on this by removing Assad from power. Now ISIS, Al-Qaeda, the little phony terrorists who run this country, they're defenseless. Israel can just fly over the capital. Israel has never been able to fly over the capital of Damascus. Well, they can now. They can do whatever they want.
Today, July 16th, one of which showed a massive explosion from an Israeli aerial bombardment on the Syrian Army Joint Chiefs of Staff headquarters. The Defense Ministry headquarters was targeted during a live broadcast on Syrian TV. The news anchor rushed out and left the broadcast in shock, and staff left the newsroom amidst the chaos and explosions.
They did it on purpose. See, they bombed right. They did it on purpose. They want the whole world to witness terror.
Furthermore, the intense and cruel Zionist aerial bombardment also targeted the Syrian presidential headquarters. However, the attack on the palace appears to be symbolic for now, as they only hit the gate. As in the footage, thick smoke billowed over Damascus, which is unprecedented, as Israel claims it will not allow the new Syria to build up military power as it did under President Assad. Israel says it is attacking Syria to protect the Druze in Syria, but experts didn't believe it. Israel never helps anyone, only to help. They always take something for themselves. This has always been the post-Assad plan: demilitarize Syria and incite internal strife to justify more destruction, occupation, and control. The Gilani regime gave Israel
Al-Qaeda clown. Trump just shaking his hand, 2 weeks ago, said he's the president of Syria. Removed the sanctions so millions of dollars could flow into the hands of Al-Qaeda and ISIS, removed the terrorist group from the terrorist watch list, all that good stuff. And how does Israel repay them for helping remove Assad? Well, bombs them, tell them, well, you can't have weapons in Syria no more. You can't have tanks. You can't have planes. You can't have bullets. No, none of that.
Israel what it wanted, giving them the Golan Heights. What is happening in Syria is not only bad for Syria and its people, but also for all the Arab countries in the region, which don't seem to understand that these events will have negative consequences for everyone in the future, experts warn.
Israel won't do it all of them. Only Iran can fight back. See? Turkey helped them terrorists get in power. Now Turkey can stop Israel from doing this. Why Turkey not helping? Because the U.S. done told them they better not help. Okay, so let's back up. Because we got to get some understand on what's going on here. Well, the terrorists have been terrorizing the Christians and the Druid community. Israel is acting like they're in helping people. When human rights, These are the terrorists they put. The terrorists shave their beard, humiliate them on TV. They got a bomb minorities. They want to protect minorities now. And they can absolutely justify it because they put terrorists in power. Now they can say, see, look, these people are terrorists. We got to take the terrorists out. So we are terrorists, but you put them in power. They were doing okay, so they're humiliating the minorities in Syria, killing them. They been killing the Christians. But so now Israel says, now we can't let Christians be killed. Why they kill Christians and humiliate Christians in Israel? Well, they absolutely would do you the same way in Israel. Let's see what's going on.
The Syrian capital is being hit, and state TV says Israel is responsible.
You mean it's being attacked? It's being bombed, man. Unprecedented aggression. You know, like you be saying Russia doing Ukraine. How about some of that unprovoked aggression from Israel?
It is 4 p.m. in Damascus. It is 5 p.m. here in Abu Dhabi's CNN Middle East programming headquarters. I'm Becky Anderson. You're watching Connect the World. Let's get straight to the very latest inside Syria. And the capital, Damascus, being hit by a series of airstrikes, state media blaming Israel, and the Israeli defense minister shared video of the attack saying, quote, the painful blows have begun. Well, earlier today, Israel said it has struck the entrance to the headquarters of the Syrian armed forces in the capital. Now, this is what we know. On Tuesday, Syrian government forces were sent to the Druze stronghold of Suwaida in the south of Syria after days of sectarian violence there between the Druze and Bedouin tribes. In response, Israel, which has vowed to protect the Druze community, began launching strikes on the Syrian forces advancing towards.
Israel was vowing to protect some Arabs. That's a joke. Israel don't give a damn about them. They want to steal more land, using them people to do it. Now they're telling the Syrians, we're going to keep attacking you and bombing you until you remove yourself from this city where the Druze is at. You can be nowhere near. There's plenty of territory. It's not no small. It's not no small landmass we're talking about. There's a lot of land Israel is planning on stealing. And Israel going to say they got to step in and protect these people. Then later on, kick these people off the territory. You know, kick them off, tell them they don't like them after they steal it.
Towards Suwaida. CNN's Jeremy Diamond is in Jerusalem. Salma Abdelaziz joins us live from London. Jeremy, let me start with you. What do we know about what is happening right now in Damascus? We do have live pictures of the capital that we can bring up as you are speaking.
Yeah, well, as we have seen, the Israeli military has been carrying out airstrikes in the Syrian capital of Damascus. We know of at least one strike at the entrance to Syria's military headquarters there. 2 civilians were injured as a result of that strike, according to Syrian state TV. We have also seen several other strikes in Damascus, some of which we are still working to confirm the exact location of them. But there have been reports of strikes near the defense ministry as well as near the presidential palace. But what we are watching here on the Israeli side of the border is really quite stunning, Becky, and that is that we are seeing Druze individuals in Israel, either Israeli Druze or Syrian Druze who live in the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights, attempting to cross into Syria to try and help their fellow Druze brothers in Syria who have been under attack in the city of Suwaida. And we are seeing hundreds of these Druze individuals crossing the Israeli border fence into the Israeli-controlled buffer zone inside of Syria, trying to make their way to presumably that city of
controlled buffer zone. That's called stealing their land. Well, the buffer zone is right where all the oil is. To see what they're gonna put a buffer zone wherever your resources is at. They got to put a buffer zone there.
Suwaida. It has been an extraordinary scene to witness these hundreds of people who have broken across this guarded border fence. We have seen the Israeli military out deploying tear gas to try and get these individuals, many of whom are Israeli citizens, back onto the other side of the border. The Israeli prime minister has addressed the matter directly, saying that the situation in Suwaida, that southern city with a very heavy Druze population, calling that situation very serious, but saying that he has one request for the Druze population in Israel, and that is, quote, do not cross the border. He maintained that the Israeli military is carrying out actions. And indeed, we have heard from the Israeli defense minister, Israel Katz, who said that Israel will intensify its attacks on government forces if they do not withdraw from Suwaida. And indeed, in addition to the strikes that we've seen in the Syrian capital of Damascus.
And he could actually say that with a straight face. If Syria don't withdraw from Syria, you're going to strike them. Now, what nation in the world would allow another nation to tell them they got to withdraw from their own territory? Or else I'm going to keep striking you. And that's why the world don't take the United States. They take the U.S. as a joke because you're steady saying Russia is aggressive. And here Israel just attacking these people for no reason, saying we got to help their civilians because we just don't like what we see going on. Oh, by the way, we got to steal that land too, because they can't use that land to oppress people anymore. This is disgusting. This is exactly what Netanyahu and them doing. You just heard them tell them. They got to remove themselves from their own territory or they're going to continue to get attacked.
There have also been Israeli strikes in and near Suwaida, including strikes on tanks and other heavy equipment, trucks carrying machine guns, according to the Israeli military, that they say were headed toward that city of Suwaida. Becky?
I'll come back to you. Stand by. I just want to get Selma up at this point. You've done a lot of reporting and producing from Syria. What do we understand to be happening in the south, in Suwaida, at present on the ground? We are seeing strikes, and we understand, and we are reporting on heavy fighting there. Just explain what we understand to be going on.
Yes, so absolutely the flashpoint of Suwaida, which is a stronghold for this Druze community. They are a minority group, but they are a majority in this city. And that is where these clashes broke out over the weekend between Bedouin tribes and this Druze community. Now, we have images to show you of what that outbreak of violence looks like on the ground. Gunfire on the streets, armored vehicles, terrified families, as you can imagine. And with that outbreak of of violence over the weekend. Dozens of people were killed. That's what prompted the Syrian government to send forces to southern Syria. It says, the Syrian government says, in an attempt to quell the unrest, to calm what you're hearing and you're seeing there on your screen. But Israel's response, Israel's intervention in what is a domestic affair has, of course, poured fuel on this fire. The Syrian government's push to try to assuage the clashes in that area as part of a wider effort, Becky, of course, to try to end sectarian violence in the country. That looks very much like a situation that the country does not have a grasp on, and it makes it ever more difficult for government forces to reestablish control in an area when Israeli forces say they have no right to be there. Israel has declared a unilateral demilitarized zone in this part of Syria, something the Syrian government says it does not agree to. It is calling on Israel to stop. It is accusing Israel of violating its sovereignty. So you have a tinderbox here, Becky, with foreign intervention from Israel very much exacerbating that situation on the ground. And you heard from my colleague Jeremy as well, more individuals as well potentially going into Syria and adding to that chaos.
Yeah, and I want to be absolutely clear, Jeremy, I'm going to bring you back in. We are getting reports of barbaric attacks on the civilian population in Sueda, and we will get more reporting on that as we move through the next couple of hours. Let's just be quite clear about this. Why are the Israelis getting involved, and why have they vowed to protect the Druze community?
Well, the Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar kind of laid it out this morning, saying that there are two primary reasons for Israel intervening in Syria. The first of which, he said, is that Israel is trying to protect itself, that it does not want to allow certain armed elements along its border in that southern part of Syria. So there is a national security interest, they say. The second element, though, which seems to be the most salient one at this moment, is that they say that they have an interest in protecting the minority Druze community in Syria, citing strong bonds that Israel has with the Druze community. And what's important to also understand is that the Druze community is not a monolith. First of all, the Druze are a religion. They live in Syria, they live in Israel, they live in Lebanon as well. And there are very much differences, not only between the Syrian Druze and the Israeli Druze, the Lebanese Druze, but also within the Syrian Druze community itself. There are several prominent clerics within the Syrian Druze community, one of whom has very openly allied himself with Israel and has had communication with the spiritual leader of the Druze here in Israel. And there has been a constant back and forth there, including with that cleric requesting support and assistance from the Israelis. The Israeli Druze community here, as well as the Syrian Druze who live in the Golan Heights, some of whom have Israeli citizenship, but most of whom do not, they have, of course, a very, very strong affinity with the Syrian Druze community in Syria proper, and have felt extraordinarily concerned over the course of the last several months as they have witnessed attacks being carried out on that Druze community, especially in this city of Sueda. We have seen Israeli Druze members of the military protesting at the border, saying that they want to go there and fight to defend their Syrian Druze brothers. The Israeli government, of course, carrying out these strikes, but also urging those Druze individuals in Israel not to cross the border, not to take matters into their own hands. But given some of the images that have been circulating here in Israeli media of some of the attacks that have been carried out on the Druze in Sueda, as you can see, many individuals are feeling compelled to act on their own. And that is why we are seeing these scenes now of hundreds of people crossing into this buffer zone in Syria, which Israel controls, and trying ultimately to get all the way into Syria and to that city of Sueda.
These people should be ashamed of themselves, all that line that they just told. This is what they want. This is how you balkanize a country, have everybody killing and fighting one another. This is the playing world. Then they, like they did Libya. You have tribal warlords running the place. Now Israel got to step in because Israel said they can't have tribal warlords running the place. They want to help protect the citizens. That's a lie.
How do you make sense of what's going on in Syria?
Well, it's very important to understand, the location we're talking about. Suwaida is part of the Horan region. Horan region is a geographic region that encompasses the south of Syria, south of Damascus, all the way to most of the north of Jordan. Okay, and if people want to understand it, they need to look at topographic maps. Don't look at maps of borders and so on. So you can understand the natural region. And these are, Suwaida is it means the blackened area, which there's a volcano there, and you can see from the satellite images all that black rock that covers it. That's what Suwaida. And in Suwaida, there's Jabal al-Arab or Jabal al-Druz, and this area of Suwaida is mainly followers of the Druze sect of Islam, what is called unificationist Muslims. And the reason that it's being targeted is because the Suwaida region and the Druze population of Jabal al-Arab area are one of the pillars of Arabic liberation thought and Syrian unification thought. So the Syrian Great Revolt against French occupation was started in 3 locations: in Suwaida, in the coast of Syria, and in Deir ez-Zor. So those 3 regions that people don't think are the kind of center of Syrian governance are actually the ones that usually drive the country, not the main cities. And that allows, if we look over history, always revolts in Syria come from these 3 regions, revolts against bad rule. And so the Wahhabis and the Zionists and the imperialists have a vested interest in breaking the will of the people of Suwaida and the Druze Muslims, forcing them to, what we saw, for instance, over the last few days, those Wahhabi attacks on Suwaida included purposeful desecration of monuments of the Syrian Revolution, monuments and posters and so on that are commemorating Amir al-Atrash, the leader of the Syrian revolt. We saw also the Wahhabis purposefully attack Druze sheikhs and shaving their mustaches and then killing them, desecrating them. Those are all designed by the Zionists, the imperialists, and the Wahhabi tools of them to break the will of the Druze population and force them to call for basically aid from the Zionists. That's what they're trying to do. It's been now, more than 6 months since the fall of the Assad government. And up until now, the Druze of Syria are refusing to collaborate with the Zionists. And now we see all of this attack on the Druze is to force them to call for aid from the Zionists.
Laith, how do you see the way that maybe Turkey or Qatar is trying to interfere. Did they try to do anything with the government in Syria, or they're just sitting aside and seeing what's going on there? And we know that Israel is actively they're attacking the, as I've mentioned, Sweden and other part of Syria. What Israel wants, what Turkey and Qatar want in Syria.
Yeah, I think it's all theatrics, right? So we look at the Al Jazeera coverage of what's happening in Sweden, and it's very anti-Druze, saying that the Druze are allied with Israel. Remember, the Wahhabis and Ikhwani agents of the United States and the Zionists in the region, with the fall of the Assad government, actually lost their fig leaf that covers their collaboration with Israel. So for years, they were telling the Arabic population, the Sunni population, that the Assad government is collaborating with Israel, that it stops the attacks on Israel, all of those things, that is stopping the Sunni Muslims from liberating Syria so they can go into Palestine. And now what we have is, with the fall of the Assad government, it's been 7 months of everybody watching the Wahhabi government of HTS, of al-Julani, collaborating directly with the Israelis, and even just 2 days ago, meeting with the Israelis in Azerbaijan. So the Al Jazeera is now trying to portray the Druze population of Suwaida, which is, again, one of the pillars of Syrian liberation and Arabic unification. These are people that call themselves Arabs, that call themselves Syrian before they call themselves Druze. And on the same time, we see the Israelis attempting to look like they are defending the Druze. So we saw a few attacks that the Israelis filmed of them hitting tanks of HTS that are trying to enter, Suwaida. We don't know if that's true, if that's actually happened. But up until now, the population of Suwaida is still refusing to collaborate with the Zionists, and there's no calls by any of the leaders of the Druze communities in Syria for interference on the side of Israel, or calling for Israel to aid them. And I would say the Druze population of Suwaida is able to defend itself at this moment against the HTS. It doesn't need anybody. So in the end, this is all theatrics to give excuse to the Zionists to intervene in Syria, and HTS is providing that excuse.
The Druze population who are living in the territories controlled by Israel, is there any connection between the two? Is there any sort of mutual understanding? Do they have the same goal? Do we know about that?
So the Druze population inside the territories that the Zionists control are split into two parts. One is the Syrian Druze of the Golan Heights, which are patriotic Syrians till today, even with the fall of the Assad government, are refusing to take Israeli citizenship. They've been offered Israeli citizenship since 1967, and they refuse it. And then there's the Palestinian Druze population, which is split again in two parts, but the vast majority of their leadership being collaborationist with the Israeli regime. And we saw that manifesting today and yesterday with tens of Syrian Druze inside the Golan Heights carrying arms and breaching the fence that separates the occupied parts of the Golan from the rest of Syria, and entering into Syria to go fight to defend their brothers and sisters in Suwaida. Those were not Palestinian Druze; these were Syrian Druze from the Golan Heights, and that shows you they don't want to be part of any Israeli military that intervenes in Syria. They want to be the ones that go to the aid of their extended relatives.
Chaos, regardless how they get it.
Does Israel see Druze as a problem, or they see something that they can manage it, they can somehow control it?
Well, the Druze of Syria, which are the largest section of Druze in the area, they're bigger population than the Druze in Lebanon or Palestine or Jordan. They are a big headache to the Zionists, the Wahhabis, the liberals, and the imperialists. Again, because they have this history, and they're proud of it. They're very proud of it, that the liberation of Syria from French rule wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for Amir al-Atrash. Okay, he's the main leader of the Syrian revolt against French occupation, and this Palestinian Druze population has now become insignificant, in the hierarchy of the religious institutions of the Druze. And the Druze in Lebanon have always also been anti-Zionist. And we see right now the Druze in Lebanon, as they're watching the slaughter happen in Syria of their friends and families, they are getting more and more radical, re-radicalized. They used to be, the Socialist Party that's led by Jumblat in Lebanon used to be very active in the fight against the Israelis in the 70s and the 80s. Now it's become very, much more involved in politics than armed struggle. But we see right now a return to the activations of militias in the Druze communities here in Lebanon, because they want to defend themselves in the case of a situation of a Wahhabi or a Zionist attack on the country, because they can see clearly what the fate of their community would be if they're not able to defend themselves.
Faith, what's your take on the latest, on the visit of Netanyahu to the United States? He talked with Donald Trump. But when it comes to the region, in your opinion, what the Netanyahu administration is asking for from Donald Trump and the aid that the United States can provide them with?
Yeah, I mean, clearly there was at the top of the priority of Netanyahu's visit is the end of the Epstein file. And we saw that manifest immediately. Most probably Trump had to be reminded of what tapes they have on him. But the aspirations of Netanyahu to attack and destroy Iran and its military capabilities, or attack Lebanon and destroy Hezbollah completely, or Yemen, those are daydreams that the empire cannot deliver on. So no matter what Trump would like to do to appease Netanyahu and the Zionist and the Epstein ring that has all those tapes on him, there's nothing that he can offer without going to a world war or a nuclear war. And those are things that the United States will not be willing to do for Israel, because that's the end of humanity. Literally, this is what it means. There will be the end of the United States. So even if he would like to do something, Trump, especially as we saw his envoy Barak at the same time as Netanyahu was in Washington, he said in media here in the region, was threatening that HTS will attack Lebanon and take over Tripoli and the Beqa' Valley. And, those are clear indications of what the US wants to do. But HTS is still busy oppressing the local Syrian population and cannot govern the country. And as we see, if they would have attacked Lebanon while they still had Suwaida out of control, It would have been, their back behind will be exposed. And this is part of what they're trying to do right now, to oppress and suppress the independence or revolution or of Suwaida, so in order to attack Lebanon. Now we see that this is impossible. So what can the U.S. do if the Wahhabi death squads cannot invade Lebanon to achieve the goal that the U.S. wants? The Israelis cannot attack Lebanon because they will get beaten up again. They can't attack Yemen, neither the U.S. or Israel, and they can't attack Iran directly. So what we will see is the United States delivering on the low-hanging fruit for the Zionists, which is more sectarianism in Syria, possible sectarianism and terrorism in Iraq, possible terrorism attacks in Iran and Lebanon. But that's all. That's all they can do. That's not something that is not genocidal, but it's definitely not going to lead to the defeat of the enemies of the Zionists. And the Zionist colony is rapidly collapsing by itself.
Lace, what has happened with Israel, looking at the assassination of the leaders and all of this, they didn't gain, in my opinion, anything militarily when they went to the southern part of Lebanon to fight Hezbollah. And they asked for ceasefire, if you remember. And they attacked Iran, assassination, all of these things. Or we can say this is somehow a terrorist act on the part of a government doing and managing all of these things, but nothing militarily and strategically comes in favor of Israel. Do you feel that the people in the United States or even in Israel, maybe in the region, the Arab states are recognizing what is happening to Israel? They're not gaining, I think, more than these assassinations. What's the outcome for Israel? If we assume that we put ourselves in the shoes of Israelis, in the shoes of these people who are running Israel in the Netanyahu administration, what is the outcome for them, in your opinion?
Yeah, look, the Zionists have been fighting militias or not states for a long time. And, they think because militias are small, attacking the leadership and so on will have a great effect. But we've seen this play out for the last, 80 years in Palestine. And no matter how much of the leadership was killed, the movement birthed new leaders. So it was kind of crazy for them to think that something that didn't achieve any goals, attacking militias this way, that it will work in attacking a whole state that is 90 million people, that has institutions, that has an army that's been active as is since independence in 1979 and the revolution. Iran will maybe, a few of those people that we were martyred, we lost some of their experience, but immediately there is somebody to replace them with their own experience, and they've probably learned from that person that just got assassinated their own experience added to theirs, and we'll have a different actually strategies coming out from this new generation of leaders. And that's actually bad for the Zionists, because when you have like an enemy that you have studied for 25, 30 years, you can start predicting their patterns, their behaviors, their ways of thinking. But when you have a new person in charge of a force and you don't have all of that history in front of you, there's a greater chance that you will have surprising events happening that you cannot calculate. So it's in a way just like the fall of the Assad government is turning out to be a blessing in disguise. We may think of those assassinations and the martyrdoms and the coming in of new leaders could be a blessing also in disguise for the axis of resistance.
What's going on with the capitulated Yemen? They have capitulated, and it doesn't seem that was so much in the way that Donald Trump was describing, was picturing this situation. When it comes to Yemen, it seems to me, Leith, that Yemen is one of the important factors in the whole calculation of Israel, that they cannot do anything with it. They couldn't do anything. You look at the way that they tried to fight Yemen with Saudis, with all these Arab states in the region, then back down. The United States comes in, and again, nothing comes out, and Israel is just continuing attacking, continuing the attacks on Yemen. What is I think there is a lot to learn from Yemen for the region, for those people who really feel to support Palestine, to support Gaza. And do you see that the case of Yemen could somehow expose the ineffectiveness of Israel, the government in Israel, and the whole force against Yemen?
Over the last 24 hours, Yemeni armed forces fired multiple hypersonic missiles and drones on Ashrash or Eilat port in the south of Palestine, as well as the Israeli main bases in the Naqab Desert. So Yemen is continuing to target the Zionists, and all the shipping of every company that collaborates or works or delivers anything to Israel is now being targeted in the Red Sea, the Arabian Sea, the Indian Ocean. And the US is not doing anything about it. They don't want to, the way that Yemen is targeting now the ships is more severe than it was before the confrontation between the US and Yemen. So that shows you that there is nothing that the US can do. And if it enters this war again with Yemen, Yemen will be more severe in its punishment and could sink aircraft carriers. So the Zionists are left with one choice of fighting this on by their own, by air, very expensive, and having Western aircrafts pretend that they're Israelis and fly from Djibouti and Somalia and the Gulf countries, all from airports that the Emiratis built in Somalia and Djibouti. Again, useless kind of war. You cannot change any realities on the ground in Yemen from the air. And this is why we saw over the last week the Saudis and the Emiratis attempting to re-trigger their assets on the ground in South Yemen to attack the north. And there was literally terrorist attacks on civilian markets in Yemen. And this gang that the Saudis and Emiratis activated got, after they committed all those massacres, they were confronted by Yemeni armed forces and they were crushed. So there is no real possibilities of triggering any land invasion of Yemen. And so we will see continued just air attacks on Yemen that are ineffective because how tough the terrain of Yemen is. There's so many valleys and so many mountains. It's impossible to monitor everything from satellites or drones. Drones don't fly even over Yemen because so many were shot down by the Yemeni armed forces. And the intelligence on the ground of collaborationists is very weak in Yemen. There's social cohesion in the areas that the Sana'a government rules. So it's a losing war. They cannot win against Yemen. And we should expect over the next few weeks and months that Yemen's technologies that are being used to attack the Zionist colony will accelerate in their capabilities, because Yemen is just testing and testing and testing. Some of those weapons, we saw the developments of them being used by Iran after all those experiments by Yemen over the year before.
Laith, the case of Azerbaijan, it's something going on with Azerbaijan. They use Azerbaijan to attack Iran during 12 days of war between Iran and Israel. And then something happened between Azerbaijan and Russia, some sort of chaos. Do you see the case of Azerbaijan as something that we would hear in the near future more? And is it connected to what's going on in Syria, to what's going on in the Central Asia? Because they're talking about these Wahhabis and Salafis being connected by these countries. And how do you see the role of Azerbaijan in the whole situation?
Yeah, I mean, again, people should look at maps to understand these things. But Azerbaijan is a Turkic country, meaning they speak a language from the Turkic family of languages, but it's also mostly Shia. Okay, so there's this duality between identity. You have a lot of Azerbaijanis inside Iran, in the Azerbaijan province in Iran. They are the largest linguistic minority in Iran. And of course, Azerbaijan was part of the Soviet Union. So that's another layer that people need to understand. And what is really weird about the situation in Azerbaijan is that Aliyev, the current president, his father was the best friend of Hafez al-Assad of Syria. Okay, they had a really good relationship. They were both Zionists. They were both very close to the Soviet Union and eventually Russia. And Aliyev, the father, was close to Iran also. And we just saw Al-Julani go to Baku. And although Al-Julani is destroying statues in Syria, especially for, as we saw, Druze, Alawi, Shia, and or their shrines of their martyrs and leaders, and including the shrine of Hafez al-Assad, former president of Syria. Al-Julani went to the shrine and statue of Aliyev, the father, and bowed down and laid flowers, okay, in his time in Azerbaijan. So there's a lot of contradictions in Azerbaijan, which makes it always historically a contested space, right? So you have the Turkic, but Shia, Soviet, but also third worldist, and now Zionist and NATO. And so contradictions, and that's something very common of what we would call border cultures, cultures that are between civilizations that are much bigger and have those, this is how geography and culture works. So what could be happening right now is that Iran and Russia, both of them, are getting a lot of negative effects of Aliyev's collaboration with Turkey and with NATO and with the Zionists. So we saw the effects on Armenia, and we are now beginning to see, as we saw, the effects on Iran, with the vast majority of all attacks on Iran coming from Azerbaijani airspace during the Zionist attack. So Iran has possibilities of being able to influence what's happening in Azerbaijan. So does Russia, but Iran is more careful than Russia with its attempts to influence anything in Azerbaijan, because it doesn't want to have its own Azerbaijani population feel any questions about how their own government in Iran is dealing with Azerbaijan. So while we would all like Iran to be more aggressive in its approach to Azerbaijan because of the collaboration with the Zionists, it is definitely not a smart thing to be confrontational with Azerbaijan. It has to be done in much more subtle ways. And what can I say? Our enemy has more maneuverability space in this situation.
Getting back to the meeting between Donald Trump and Netanyahu, they were talking about a humanitarian city it's called a concentration camp in the southern part of Gaza in Rafah. Do you feel that this is somehow a decision based on the desperation that Netanyahu is feeling today, or they really see some sort of they can have some sort of arrangement to manage the situation, because so far they couldn't fight Hamas, they couldn't defeat Hamas. But how about moving all these more than 2 million people to the southern part, to a city, as they call it, I would say a prison for all these people? Is that possible, or they're just making this out of desperation?
They will. What they're saying is that they're going to create this concentration camp with or without the Palestinians agreeing to it, and that anyone that will be found outside the borders of this concentration camp will be killed. So they are continuing in their genocidal practice. They're just finding more ways to justify it. And I would like everybody to, at the same time, remember that the United States is currently building its own concentration camps. So we saw that alligator Alcatraz in Florida, which they're jamming, I think 60 people into a cage that's opened up to all the weather, and it's in a swamp area that's an island that there's all alligators everywhere, and so the U.S. has already moved to creating its own concentration camps, extermination camps on its own territory. And there's going to be multiple of these all across the US, not only in Florida. So if it's normalized inside United States borders, we should expect it to be normalized in Gaza. Okay? There's nothing that's going to stop it from happening except the military defeat of the Israelis. So those talks about creating this concentration camps indicate that it's already in progress of building it. And the genocide of the Palestinian people will continue until the end of this war, either with the extermination of the Palestinian people and or the defeat of the Zionists. And of course, it's more likely that there will be a defeat of the Zionist colony than a total extermination of the Palestinian people. The internal cohesion of the Zionist colony is collapsing. Their military is at its weakest point in its history. Tens of their soldiers are killing themselves every week. All their elite units have been decimated. There's 18 years old fighting on the front lines, and they're having to even send their women on the front lines. Most of those Israeli women units, by the way, are all like desk units. There's not really many Israeli women that are in the front lines. But now they're having to push them in the front lines, just like Ukraine, because of the low grade of the new soldiers that are being taken into the Israeli military. And so we have the internal cohesion of the military of Israel and its political class, its financial influence, its global influence, all in retreat, and it's at their worst point in more than 100 years. Even the influence of the Zionists in the 1920s, 100 years ago, was stronger than their influence today in the streets of the Western capitals. So we're, the Zionists are going to try to continue with wars. Their only solution, as they see it, to escape the inevitable collapse of the colony is to continue with mass extermination campaigns and wars against everybody around them. How long can they keep that up? That's the question that the only people that can answer it are these, those who are fighting on the battlefield.
I think so far we can say that Israel is not militarily capable of fighting. I didn't see that much of leverage. Maybe they're using, as you've mentioned, so much these reservists and those people who are not much trained to fight. Because with the case of Lebanon, I remember they couldn't do anything. I think more than assassination, nothing could come out of the Israeli military. Most of them, they know how to use drones against people, but when it comes to the battlefield, it doesn't that much of a skill coming out of Israeli army. And they're so young. Do you, Laith, do you believe that because these people, we talk about Ukraine and how the military machine, this sort of fight between Russia and Ukraine has destroyed the youth of Ukraine. It seems that that case is happening to Israel as well. It's not just happening to the other side. Israel is suffering a lot in terms of their economy, their military, and nobody seems to talk about it. And everybody's when we talk about Israel, it seems that everything is somehow in favor of Israel, while what's going on within Israel is something in terms of the immigration that is happening. The economy is not working. The military is not that much powerful. The image we had before October 7 and today, it's totally different image from Israel and Israeli power. And do you feel that would cause some sort of doubt in the mind of the Arab states in the region, or maybe Turkey, who are important, in my opinion?
Yeah, look, we know now from Jewish Zionist organizations in the UK that over the last 20 months, 5,000 at least Israeli soldiers were taken to the UK for treatment. Okay, so you could imagine how many were sent to the United States. If 5,000 were sent to the UK, it's very logical that many times that were sent to the US and Canada and Germany and so on. So they have very, very high injury rates that they're hiding, and having to survive a RPG or landmine explosion means you definitely are maimed. You have lost some limbs. So there's also a high crippled numbers of Israeli soldiers, permanently crippled. And we will not get the full numbers until they stop lying. And they're not going to stop lying about it until they are not in power anymore. And I think if they're all those mercenaries that the US and Canada and others that are sending, who are, by the way, right now in charge of the aid distribution, we're seeing every day Israeli, American, and Canadian soldiers or mercenaries shooting at the Palestinians that are coming to pick up some aid. So even those are now demoralized. Like you could imagine all of those Western mercenaries that were sent over the last 22 months to Palestine and getting their own defeats over and over, how this mercenary armies of the West are getting themselves also demoralized. And I think the situation is bad, maybe even worse than the Ukrainian military situation, the Israeli, because it's a small country, small population. Most of the Zionists in the West are big talkers. They're all cowards. They wouldn't go down and fight on the field. So yeah, we see a lot of gangsters in Brooklyn or in Toronto or Montreal picking up fights with women in the streets of those cities that are pro-Palestinian, but they will never go to the battlefield in Palestine. Very small numbers of them are going. And unfortunately, in terms of the Arabic countries in the Gulf and Turkey, we have to look at how in the old days of slavery in the United States, when the slaves rebelled in the field and set the master's house on fire, you had the kitchen slave or the house slave that would fight back the field slaves and stay inside the house in the end, even when master leaves and runs away, stays inside the house as the house gets burned on top of them. That's how loyal and house trained house slaves are historically. It's not something out of the blue. So I do not expect the Turkish leadership or the Arabian Peninsula collaborationist class to flip sides and go with the field slaves in their rebellion before the fall of the American control of the region and the fall of the Zionist colony, and most probably after the fall of the Zionist colony and the withdrawal of the US, those elite will fight on behalf of the US until they are burned with the house they're in. There's no change. There will be no change before that. It's the historical record tells us that, and otherwise, if we don't look at history, we'll just dream of things that can't happen.
Laith, before wrapping up, yesterday the EU Council failed to take a decision in dealing with the Israeli and their behavior in Gaza. When it comes to Ukraine, they're so much aggressive. They want to do everything. They want to buy weapons. They want to send them to Ukraine. They want to fight. There's so much. They're crying for Ukrainians. There's so much hateful. They hate Russia because of what's going on in Ukraine. But when it comes to Gaza, when it comes to Palestine, you don't see anything. And how can we describe this sort of hypocrisy on the part of Europeans? And because I really believe that for the case of Ukraine, they're not capable of doing any sort of substantial changes in what's going on. But in the case of Palestine, they can do something toward the Israeli government. They can do something that help Palestinians and Gazans, but they're not doing it.
Yeah, all of Western Europe, specifically Anglo-Germanic, Latin countries with Greece, fell under American occupation at the end of World War II, and since then they have been vassals. And any attempt of these countries to escape that vassalhood, including the 1956 war, tripartite invasion by the British, French, and the Israelis of Egypt, just to prove the British and the French wanted to prove that they're not vassals after World War II. That was their last attempt at proving they're not vassals, and they got their neck snapped back by the U.S., who supported Egypt in 1956 just to teach the French and the English a lesson that they never will unlearn or forget. And clearly the French and the British elite have not forgotten that lesson. They are, all of them are good collaborators of the American. They don't govern their own countries. There's more American soldiers on German soil than there is German soldiers. Those are all indicators of vassalhood. So I do not expect the European Union countries to either stop supplying weapons to Ukraine, in fact, paying for those weapons, as we see now. Trump has forced them to pay for the weapons that he's going to send to Ukraine, and they all said, yes, daddy, openly. I mean, it's crazy that they, the German chancellor would use those terms when talking about Trump, but that's the world we live in. And in terms of Palestine, there's countries like Spain that have a huge population that is anti-Zionist. The vast majority of Spaniards, no matter which region they're coming from in Spain, are against the Zionist colony, for the liberation of Palestine. So their government, although it is also a vassal, has no choice but to differentiate its positionality on Palestine from the rest of the European countries. I say this in a sad way. I don't like the fact that the Spaniards are playing this game. Spain controls Gibraltar Strait, and they could very simply shut down Gibraltar Strait for any shipping to the Zionist colony that's bringing weapons from the US, Germany, and the UK, which is 99% of all weapons going to the Zionist colony are from the US, UK, and Germany. So they could do that, but they don't do it. Okay, we see how there is now the Hague Group meeting in Colombia, in Bogota, and that includes all these countries that speak and work on international law issues, like including South Africa and others. But what's going to happen if the Bogota Hague Group, considers the Zionist government as war criminals? Can they do anything about it? No. But they can take action if they want to directly without talk, by closing the Gibraltar Strait. And or Algeria and Tunis, who are also parts of this Hague Group right now, they also can shut down the Sicily Strait for any shipping going to the Zionist colony. Is the US going to go to war with Spain, Algeria, and Tunis to continue shipping weapons to the Zionist colony? No, it wouldn't. So why do we see all this talk? And I think it's unfortunately all to kind of manage the anger of the populations in those countries and diffuse them away from revolutionary action. Because if we know there is in Spain revolutionaries that are still active militarily, whether it's in the Basque country or in Catalonia and or Andalusia regions, okay? And those people are like a hair's away from taking action. A hair's away from taking action, especially with these Zionists giving us the example of smuggling a few drones and firing from inside Iran and inside the US, Russia. So at any moment right now, a revolutionary in any of these coastal areas in Mediterranean can fly a few drones, hit a few ships going to Israel. Nobody can catch them. Nobody can stop them. The most impressive, intelligence agencies in the world cannot track stuff like this. So all it needs is for people in places like Spain, in places like Italy, in Algeria, in Tunis, to feel that there is no hope in any non-violent paths for this to happen. So we're just one hair away from that happening. And this theatric about the Hague Group and Spain fighting within the EU about Palestine is all just to avert that inevitable reality.
Last month, Israel launched a 12-day air campaign against Iran, hitting nuclear sites and military bases, killing top commanders and scientists.
Dağdan aşan, selinen, ağlaşaydım uzak düşen, elinen, bir görəydim ayrılığı kimsaldır.
Iran says Israeli jets and drones used Azerbaijani airspace to pull it off. Fuel tanks from Israeli planes were found bobbing in the Caspian Sea off Iran's coast. Baku's air defense system was silent as Israeli terrorist warplanes and drones heads to Iran and Tehran's, pointing the finger at Baku for letting it happen. Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev swears up and down his country didn't greenlight this, but the Islamic Republic isn't buying it. This whole saga is a geopolitical dumpster fire, and it's worth unpacking how we got here, what's at stake, and why Israel's involvement is pouring gas on an already tense relationship. If you'd like to support this channel in a big way, just hit that subscribe button. It helps us reach more people with the truth that needs to be heard. Your support makes a huge difference in helping us beat the algorithm and get our content onto the timelines of those who need it most.
İran İslam Respublikası'nın prezidenti, sizin Azerbaycan Respublikası'na gelmeniz şerefine Fəxri Qaraldızlı, Qaral Rəisi Polkovnik Leytenant Quliyev.
You see, these two neighbors have a history that's equal parts cooperation and bad blood. They share a border, a Shia Muslim majority, and a tangled past. Azerbaijan's got a significant ethnic Azeri population in Iran, some 15 to 20 million people, who Iran worries might get ideas about separatism if Baku gets too bold. Back in the 1990s, after Azerbaijan gained independence from the Soviet Union, Iran was initially supportive, offering economic aid during the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict with Armenia. The two even signed a non-aggression pact in the early 2000s. But things soured fast. Azerbaijan's growing ties with the US and Israel, especially its arms deal with the latter, started raising eyebrows in Tehran. By 2012, Iran was accusing Azerbaijan of helping Israel assassinate its nuclear scientists, a claim Baku dismissed but never quite shook off. Fast forward to 2020, and the second Nagorno-Karabakh war cranked up the tension. Iran, while officially neutral, leaned toward Armenia, partly because Azerbaijan's victory emboldened its own Azeri minority, and partly because Baku's alliance with Israel was getting tighter. Azerbaijan's shiny new Israeli-made drones were raining hell on Armenian forces, and Iran wasn't thrilled about its neighbor cozying up to its archenemy. Then, in 2023, Azerbaijan opened an embassy in Tel Aviv, a move Iran saw as a slap in the face. Add to that Azerbaijan's accusations that Iran was stirring up religious extremism in Baku, and you've got a relationship that's been simmering on the edge of hostility for years. The Israel's terror Operation Rising Lion, which we reported extensively on, wasn't just a flex. It was a full-on assault on Iran's nuclear ambitions and military infrastructure. Tehran, Karaj, Tabriz, and other cities got pounded with 950 killed, including 380 civilians, according to some estimates. Iran's air defenses were shredded, and the strikes came from multiple directions, including over the Caspian Sea, a route that screams Azerbaijan's involvement, since Armenia, Russia, and Turkmenistan are Iran's allies. Iranian officials, including President Masoud Pezeshkian, called out Baku, demanding answers. Azerbaijan's response, a flat denial with Aliyev insisting his territory wasn't used. But the evidence, Those fuel tanks, drone sightings in Nakhchivan tells a different story. Iran's ambassador to Armenia even took a swipe at Baku's leadership, and Azerbaijan's media fired back, calling Iran's supreme leader Khamenei the enemy. Ouch.
I would say that there are several aspects to this. There is geoeconomic and geopolitical aspect to this, and on the geoeconomic front, the Zangezur corridor plays a big role. The Zangezur corridor, for those who might not be familiar, is a geoeconomic. It's a geographic region connecting Azerbaijan mainland with Nakhchivan region, which is sort of on the other side of Armenia, which is wedged between the mainland Armenia and Nakhchivan region. And then it continues on to connect Azerbaijan with Turkey. And it's an extremely important area that sits basically in the northern Iran. Iran is part of this. And the conflict now is about stakes, who takes which piece and which state will be able to actually have control. There could be a group of states in the region, or there could be, I highly doubt there will be a one state that will take control of this region. But it is further split within sort of what it's called the Turkic world, led by Erdogan in Turkey, that protects Azerbaijan in the region. We all know how closely Turkey was supporting Azerbaijan's second war against Armenia vis-a-vis Nagorno-Karabakh, when Azerbaijan basically acquired militarily Nagorno-Karabakh and restored its full sovereignty. Erdogan and Turkey was behind it in terms of helping Baku and Aliyev's government to achieve that strategic aim. So Zangezur corridor is part of that Turkic world, led and advocated by Turkey in the region. The part of which is Azerbaijan, linguistically linked, obviously, with Turkey, and culturally in Central Asian countries that Turkey considers to be as part of its sort of new vision to influence, to increase and sort of earn back the influence in the old Turkic world, which it had always viewed that it had some sort of natural right to influence, except that when the Soviets took over, that those ambitions were curtailed. But then after the breakup of the Soviet Union,
why would Azerbaijan roll the dice like this? Simple. Israel's a key player in Baku's security strategy. Since the early 2000s, Israel has supplied Azerbaijan with billions in weapons, drones, missiles, you name it, in exchange for oil and strategic access. Posts on X have been buzzing about Azerbaijan allegedly offering air bases near the Iranian border for Israeli strikes, a claim that's been floating since at least 2023. Tehran's long suspected Baku of being Israel's staging ground, and this latest incident just pours fuel on that paranoia. Azerbaijan gets cutting-edge tech and a powerful ally. Israel gets a foothold right on Iran's doorstep. It's a win-win for them, but a nightmare for Iran. And this has destroyed trust on the government of Azerbaijan, not only on the part of Iran, but also Russia. Let's be honest, in the high-stakes game of geopolitics, trust is a rare currency, especially when it comes to the Azerbaijani leadership. Both Iran and Russia have, at different times, tried to play Baku as a strategic partner, even a brotherly ally. But as events have shown in the past year alone, Azerbaijan has proven itself to be unpredictable, ambitious, and at times shockingly disloyal. And that's not just an opinion. It's backed by a flurry of diplomatic meltdowns, surveillance dramas, media crackdowns, and yes, alleged complicity in military aggression. Take Russia, for instance. Moscow thought it had a stable post-Soviet ally in Azerbaijan, but that illusion has crumbled in spectacular fashion. In December 2024, a Russian surface-to-air missile system allegedly downed Azerbaijan Airlines Flight 8243 over Chechnya, killing 38 civilians. The Kremlin issued a soft apology, hoping it would disappear into the fog of war. But Baku wasn't having it. President Ilham Aliyev went on a diplomatic offensive, slamming Moscow and demanding international condemnation. That incident sparked what many now call the most intense diplomatic freeze between the two countries since the USSR collapsed. And things only got worse. In last month, Russian security forces arrested dozens of Azerbaijani nationals in Yekaterinburg, allegedly for national security concerns. 2 detainees mysteriously died in custody. Azerbaijan responded by launching its own investigation, publicly accusing Russia of torture and cancelling Russian-sponsored cultural events in Baku. Retaliation didn't stop there. Azerbaijani authorities raided the local office of Russia's Sputnik media agency, arrested top editors, and accused them of laundering money and undermining Azerbaijani sovereignty. Think about that for a moment. A supposed ally arresting your journalists and shutting down your media. Moscow was furious, but Baku stood firm. Now switch gears to Iran. Tehran has long tried to view Azerbaijan through the lens of Islamic Brotherhood. After all, Azerbaijan is a Shiite majority nation. But Baku's foreign policy tells a very different story. As I pointed out earlier in this video, during the 12-day war, Tehran claimed that drones and missiles were launched from vectors that could only be accessed via Azerbaijani corridors. Of course, Baku denied the allegations, but the silence from its air defense systems and the sudden activity of Israeli electronic warfare near the Caspian raised serious red flags. But the rift between Iran and Azerbaijan isn't new. Remember the January 2023 attack on the Azerbaijani embassy in Tehran? A lone gunman stormed the embassy and killed a security officer. Iran called it a personal grievance, not terrorism. Baku didn't buy it. They shut down the embassy, recalled diplomats, and accused Iran of harboring anti-Azerbaijani radicals. Since then, relations have never fully recovered. Add to this Azerbaijan's growing military alliance with Israel and deepening ties with NATO-friendly Turkey, and it becomes clear why Tehran views Baku not as a neighbor, but a potential proxy threat. And it's not just about the past. It's about where Azerbaijan is headed. The Aliyev government is making bold moves to align with Western powers, casting off both Russian and Iranian influence. Azerbaijan has refused to attend Russian military parades, embraced joint military drills with Turkey, and even signed energy cooperation deals with European states that openly snub Russian pipelines. Baku is building a brand of independence rooted in realpolitik, not religious solidarity or old Soviet loyalties. What makes this even more complicated is the timing. With Russia bogged down in Ukraine and Iran entangled in regional conflicts stretching from Gaza to the Red Sea, Azerbaijan is flexing its muscles, knowing that both Moscow and Tehran are too distracted to mount a real response. It's the classic opportunist strategy. Break old alliances while your rivals are too busy bleeding elsewhere. So here's the bottom line. Russia and Iran once saw Azerbaijan as a manageable ally, someone they could rely on or at least control. But 2024 and 2025 shattered that illusion. Between suspicious airspace use, the clampdown on Russian media, the deaths of Azerbaijani nationals in Russian prisons, and the deepening alliance with Israel, Baku has become a geopolitical wild card. And in a world where survival hinges on trust and loyalty, Azerbaijan has made it clear it's playing its own game, and it's not one Iran or Russia can afford to ignore.
They playing with fire, they gonna pay for it.
One of them works with the University of Maryland. They all, from the polls that have come out, they have all shown a huge jump in support for everything in Iran. In other words, the mood has been has shifted in the country, and there's a lot of national unity. There's a lot of pride
religiosity and faith has grown. Iranian identity, which is in Iran, you cannot really separate religion and nationalism. As you know, they're very deeply intertwined. It has grown. Popularity among public figures, major important public figures, the armed forces, the guards, the army, they have gone through the roof. And there's a strong sense of victory among ordinary Iranians that they won this war. And also there's a belief that the Israeli regime will carry out another wave of attacks or another war against the Iranian people. Sentiment towards the West has declined. And this is something that the West, I think they do not comprehend how badly the Israeli regime is destroying the collective West. It's like acid, it's corrosive, it's just demolishing everything. And that's true in Iran as well. So I think, and it sort of, it fits very much with the anecdotal experiences that I have on the streets, even though anecdotal experiences are not always very accurate, because you know as well as I, in one neighborhood it could be, the sentiment could be one thing, in another neighborhood it could be something else, in one city it's one thing, in another city in another it's different. But my anecdotal experiences over the past few weeks also show that the mood in Iran has shifted quite dramatically.
When it comes, Professor Marandi, to the latest visit of Netanyahu to the United States, talking with the President of the United States, Donald Trump, and we know that this is the third time that he went to the United States to talk with Trump. Trump didn't go to Israel. His vice president didn't go to Israel. But what is he seeking? Do you think that this trip was all about the domestic policy in Israel in the aftermath of the attack on Iran, that which it's somehow Netanyahu wanted to put himself in a better position, but it doesn't seem that would be the case for Netanyahu and his administration in Israel. Your take on that, on what he wanted to achieve in the United States?
Well, I'm not saying it's about Epstein only, but it is interesting that Trump's outrageous comments in the cabinet meeting, and then his very bizarre Truth Social posts, the short one and the very long one where he rambles, they came during Netanyahu's visit. And I have a feeling that it is not completely unrelated. That's my belief. I think it's related. But obviously, Netanyahu has many problems. He lost the war against Iran, and as we move forward, we're getting more information about the damage done by Iranian missiles, especially the Khaybar Shikan, the Khaybar missile, the devastation that it has caused. We're learning more about that. We're learning more about the missile strikes in Qatar, and Trump said that they were all shot down. It's becoming clear that the Iranian missiles caused enormous damage. And of course, we all recall that when Trump, before the ceasefire, Trump said that Iran can sell its oil to China. So the fact is that Iran accepted the cessation of hostilities under certain conditions. And it's gradually coming out that it's coming to the public domain that initially, when the Americans called for a ceasefire, Iran rejected it. And then the Americans were forced to give concessions to Iran. And one of those concessions was what Trump said in public, even though Iran was exporting oil to China in large quantities. And that is something that President Raisi did. He decided to, unlike President Rouhani, he decided to say, look, I'm not going to wait for the sanctions to be lifted. I'm not going to wait for a nuclear deal. I'm going to try to push the economy forward without a nuclear deal. And if we have a nuclear deal, well, I'll use that as well. But I'm not going to wait for such for a deal to take place because it's not clear if it will happen or not. So he began to expand Iran's oil exports, initially with significant subsidized, and then gradually as the Iranian oil exports increased, the discounts they were decreased. And when he passed away, last year, the Iranians were selling oil at maximum production levels and with almost at international prices. But basically, what Trump was saying was that the difficulties that Iran has, he's going to step aside. So there were conditions that the Americans had to accept for the Iranians to accept a cessation of hostilities. So now we know that the Iranian victory was more decisive than was initially thought by many. I mean, I think it's almost universally accepted, except for in the West, where some people still believe the ridiculous narratives of the Western media and Western governments. I think in our region, it's universally recognized that Israel lost, and that it's no longer this invincible force. That image has been shattered. But not only did Iran win, not only did the Israelis beg for a ceasefire and call for Trump to get the ceasefire, but Trump had to, when Iran rejected the ceasefire, after Trump attacked Iran, Trump had to give concessions to Iran. So Netanyahu has lots of trouble on his plate. So we know that inside the regime, they have many problems, and they have Gaza, they have a host of issues. So I think that the fact that Netanyahu stayed so long reflects the crisis that he is facing. Netanyahu has to stay in power. He has to keep the war going. He has to keep the genocide going. But at the same time, it's becoming increasingly difficult for him. And I personally think that what happened with the recent events and Trump's statements about
the Epstein case.
About the I don't know if I can say the word online, but the children and so on, and Epstein, all this I think is going to make it a lot more difficult for the Israeli regime in the future, because people are the Epstein. I think without the Holocaust in Gaza, without the war against Iran, without the the attacks on Lebanon, and this whole entire 21 months, this Epstein issue and the children, the girls, it would not have had the impact that it's had now at all, because not only is this about as filthy as it can get, but not only is it now being attributed, rightly so, with the Mossad, but also people are saying that this Mossad that is doing this to girls, and they're basically forcing our leaders to obey them, they are the ones who are pushing us into this genocide, and they are the ones they've made our government a partners in this genocide. So I think that the damage that this Epstein case has brought about for Trump, but also for the Israeli regime, you've seen the previous Israeli prime minister lash out at Tucker Carlson. All of this shows that things are not going well at all for the Israeli regime. They're not going well at all for the American political establishment. And I think that the decline of the regime, the decline of the fortunes of the regime in Washington is speeding up as a result. This was like a nuclear bomb exploding amidst the MAGA camp and Trump supporters. You already see that among the left and among the liberal camp, the mood has changed. But now Trump has destroyed himself to a large degree among his supporters, and through his own stupidity alongside his corruption. But I think all of that is something that Netanyahu must be deeply, deeply, deeply concerned about.
How do you see the way that Donald Trump is dealing with the case of Ukraine? We know that he said that they're not going to send weapons to Ukraine. And after all, he's sending a lot of weapons as the new contract comes out between the United States and Europeans. He said that they're going to buy it from us and send it to Ukraine. They're talking about long-range missiles, but Donald Trump, in his latest talk, he said that he's not advocating to hit Russia, to hit Moscow. But after all, for those people who are watching what's going on with the Trump administration, what are the main issues dealing with this administration? Because the case of Ukraine can somehow be a very important issue for Iran to see how he's dealing with Ukraine, and then go to see the issue with the United States, between Iran and the United States.
Well, the issue of innocent people dying aside, the issue of young soldiers dying aside, all of this is horrific. But the fact is that the United States is basically waging a war against the world. And this has made it even more difficult for it to sustain this. So right now what we're seeing is an intensified campaign against Russia in the collective West. Now, of course, Europe is going to be paying for this according to Trump. But in any case, the collective West is going to be using more of its resources to fight Russia. At the same time, they're using their resources to boost the Zionist regime, to help it carry out this Holocaust and to carry out all the wars that it's been carrying out against Iran. Now you see it's bombing Syria, and Syria is one of the tragedy of our time, really, with this conspiracy by Netanyahu and Erdogan and Qatar and the United States. This is the end result. This is the end result. I mean, everyone has been exposed, except for these Salafi and Wahhabi mindless foot soldiers and these bought-off intellectuals through oil and gas money. Everyone knows the truth. Anyone who is sane, anyone who is reasonable, they know the truth about Syria. Everyone knows. And that has strengthened the resistance, by the way, as well, because the resistance is completely vindicated. Everyone else knows what the plan was and why Iran was opposed to what was happening in Syria. This was not sectarian on behalf of anyone in the resistance. The whole resistance is about the Palestinian people. They're Arab, they're Sunni. The resistance was about them first and foremost, and continues to be about them. But those corrupt regimes with their huge wealth, they try to make this sectarian in order to, in their alliance with the Israelis, destroy Syria, which they've done. And what we see today is tragic, how ordinary people are being slaughtered by these Wahhabi Salafi maniacs, the ISIS and Al-Qaeda, this ISIS and Al-Qaeda regime. And then the Israeli regime goes and bombs them. the hypocrisy of this, this criminal regime that brought about. And we saw how Trump himself said that he removed the sanctions because of Netanyahu. Now, the sanctions must have been removed. Those sanctions were always illegitimate and they targeted ordinary people. But the point is that Netanyahu supports this regime, yet at the same time, it bombs its troops. This is the hypocrisy of the West. And this is the sad reality that there are proxies in our region, whether it's Qatar or any other of these oil and gas rich dictatorships, or Erdogan, their ally. They've basically done their dirty work for them. They've done the dirty work for the West, and they hope that alongside that they can get a piece of the cake. But at the end of the day, they've only helped the empire. Anyway, that's just because I saw some images from Syria, I want to put that but the point is that the region right now, Netanyahu is in serious trouble. The United States is in serious trouble. Public opinion in the United States has turned against the United States, but they continue to pour in resources to help the Israeli regime alongside Ukraine. And the Israeli regime right now is despised across the region. People, when Iran was firing missiles at Israel, people across the region were cheering. People in Jordan were cheering. And these regimes were worried. They were telling their American allies that this is dangerous for us. For this to continue, this is dangerous because our people are seeing the Iranians strike back with success, and they are cheering on the streets, and that makes us look increasingly bad. So the Americans, the more resources they pour in for Ukraine, for Israel, the more divided their energy is. The trade wars that we see are intensifying again. And in addition to that, the Epstein issue at home, now the economy, the economic problems at home in the United States, all of that, and across Europe, all of that, the economic crisis in Germany, all of that aside, the Epstein issue, when you put all of these together, this does not look good for the West. This is not good news for the United States. So the intensification of the war in Ukraine is not good for the Israeli regime because Western resources are not infinite. People used to think that it's infinite, but it's not. We're seeing that they cannot keep up anymore. But at the same time, they cannot stop. They are, they're spending this money in Ukraine, in Israel, and elsewhere as if there's no tomorrow, but there is a tomorrow. So I think that the intensification of the war in Ukraine is not good for the Israeli regime. It strengthens the Iran-Russian relationship. It strengthens the Iran-Russia-Chinese relationship. It strengthens global South relations. It weakens the West at home because people are not putting two and two together. They're saying, on the one hand, the Mossad is behind this. I don't want to say it on your show, behind this very unbelievably filthy operation. And then they do it to capture our leaders through donors and so on. And then through that, our government is pursuing a policy of Holocaust. And have no doubt that there's not one Epstein. There are many Epsteins, and there are Epsteins in Europe and elsewhere. There are big Epsteins. I mean, that is just the policy of Mossad. That's who they are. And I think, anti-imperialist activists, anti-empire activists, pro-Palestinian activists, anti-war activists, they should all be very careful because I'm sure the Mossad is trying to find, to try to compromise their leaders, their activists. Everyone should be very careful across the world, in the West, but in the West in particular, but across the world. So I think that the intensification of the war in Ukraine is not good for the Israeli regime. It makes it forces the United States to put more of its energy elsewhere.
I think what's happening in the United States for the first time, we see Tucker Carlson talking about how Mossad is involved in what's going on with the case of Epstein. Do you think that the public opinion in the United States is somehow passing those red lines and somehow crossing those red lines? They're not caring about the red lines drawn by the previous generations, and they want something new. They want something that benefit the United States in a long run when it comes to the Middle East and the greater Middle East.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the most damage to the Trump regime was Trump himself. His comments in the cabinet were disgusting, but they were not even necessary. He could have just kept his mouth shut, but he chose to make those comments, which were outrageous. And then when his team tried to pin the blame on the Department of Justice, then he went on Truth Social and made it far worse. It's the damage is, I think it's irreversible. Now he's going to try to distract attention through perhaps wars, through other means, but it's not going to work. I mean, this issue is something that is, I mean, it's just difficult to imagine. And one thing that I've learned, I was sure that this was true, but I learned was that the young girls who were given to Epstein were not given just for him. In other words, these girls were also used, some of these girls were also used elsewhere. That's why I'm saying that there's not just one Epstein. I'm sure that this global network is probably, Epstein was the most high profile one and probably the most well-known one. But the point is that this is something that goes far beyond a particular individual or a particular one network. And so this, the general disgust, I mean, Americans, like anywhere else in the world except for Palestine, most people are decent. And in Palestine, the Zionists, overwhelmingly, they are disgusting people. They overwhelmingly support genocide. So, them aside, elsewhere in the world, ordinary people would be outraged by such a conspiracy where young children were being, used in this way. And so I think it's irreversible. I think Trump has damaged. It may end his presidency in a way. I'm not saying he may be removed, but I think the damage is enormous, and it's not going to go away. But I think the Mossad and the Israeli regime, the damage that it's done to them is also irreversible. And this comes after 21 months of genocide where the world has turned against it. And even the United States, where Americans are the most propagandized people in the world, they've begun to turn against it. So this is really, really bad news for Trump. Very bad news for Zionists and neocons in the United States. They are in deep trouble, and I'm sure they're very worried.
What's going on, Professor Marandi, in terms of the way that you see in the mainstream media, they're trying to somehow draw a line between Iran and Russia. They feel that, especially in the aftermath of the Israeli attacks on Iran, they have somehow picturing Russia or Iran that they have substantial differences. They have, they can. You look at the news. I know that you're aware of what Axis was talking about. One of Israelis who were part of the Israeli government, the Israeli military, he said that by referencing to Israeli sources and European sources talking about it, behind the scene, Russia is pushing for zero enrichment. What's going on? What are they trying to do, in your opinion?
Well, they're trying to create divisions between Iranians and Russians, not necessarily the government, because the governments have direct access to one another, and they know when Axios is lying and when the New York Times is lying and when the Washington Post is lying. Obviously, the people in charge, they have information that people like myself don't have access to. But the objective is to create a divide between Iran and Russia, to have ordinary Iran, because the view among ordinary Iranians towards the West is shifting. And the view towards countries that have been supportive of Iran has improved among the Iranian public. And so obviously, and have no doubt that when the Iranians are carrying out these polls regularly inside the country, the Americans and the Israelis and their European allies, they're doing the same. They're doing it through Turkey. In Turkey, they have these centers, NATO, they have these centers, they have call centers, they call inside Iran and carry out their own polls. They know, they know what they do their own poll. They know that their image has been demolished in Iran. It's really very sad how Turkey is being used in so many ways for, despite the wishes of its own people, for the sake of the empire. But anyway, but so they know this, and they therefore an objective is to try to keep Iran and the Iranian population, the Russian population divided. And the same is true with China, and the same is true with any country that it would be seen as a problem, its relationship with Iran or with Russia or with China. They want to keep everyone divided as possible. But for example, but as you saw, the Russians themselves rejected this, and they have not made any such statements. And Axios is a tool. I mean, I don't have any faith in anything that comes. Whenever you see in the New York Times and Reuters in particular, whenever they say unnamed Iranian sources, Iran high-ranking officials, that means it's all nonsense. I do not even bother with Reuters or the New York Times or Axios. Only when someone sends me, like when you sent me the Axios article and I looked through it, I sent a message to someone and then I sent you his reply. It's only I don't bother with them anymore. But I don't waste my time with them unless I want to see what they're thinking and what in Western countries. But I don't consider them to be credible sources at all. I was involved in the nuclear negotiations in 2015 as a media advisor, and then 3 years ago again with a different nuclear team as a media advisor. I know how Western media functions, how it works, and how it's not independent, and it's all it's all linked to the political establishment. It's all a facade. Those who think that there's sort of there's a real checks and balances and real freedom, and where presenters and reporters can say what they want. That's not the case. I know that from personal experience through my one-on-one relationships with many of these journalists who are well known, very famous, and so on. But the Axios report was nonsense, and it's what they want to do is to try to divide the different members of the different members of BRICS, or at least the members that are involved directly in this Western onslaught that we see that's taking place across Asia.
Professor Mandy, you mentioned that Iranian public opinion is expecting new attacks from Israel. Israelis attacking Iran again. When it comes to that sort of mindset, and you see the behavior of the government in Iran and the army, are they getting prepared? Are they getting because there were many talks about new air defense systems Iran getting from China, from Russia, I don't know. What is the current state of the mindset of Iranian military, Iranian army?
Well, many things have changed, and many things are changing. And you have to keep in mind that the Israelis, they use the capabilities of the collective West. It's not Israeli intelligence. It's NATO intelligence. And it's even the intelligence agencies of some of our neighboring countries. Some of our neighboring countries are deeply involved in the Persian Gulf, to the northwest of Iran, and they are part of this this coalition.
You mean Azerbaijan?
Again, in general, I don't want to name countries, but it's not just Azerbaijan. But in any case, the Republic of Azerbaijan. But and by the way, what Aliyev, Aliyev is hated in Iran among ordinary Iranians, and especially among Iranian Azeris, because a lot of the airstrikes were taking place in towns and villages and cities near the border, and people knew they knew where he stood. But in any case, he's made it. They've made a catastrophe that the United States, through its stupidity and through listening to the Israeli regime, it has made a catastrophic mistake. And those in the American camp, they've made a catastrophic mistake. They've miscalculated big time. I said this before. They convinced themselves that Iran is an unpopular regime, and it never was. Iran has always had a high degree of legitimacy in the eyes of the public, despite the sanctions, despite the difficulties. Yes, you have many people who are critical, many people who hate it. It's a society where people say, just recently we had a lot of journalists come to Iran, among, like Max Blumenthal, George Galloway, and many others. And they went and they traveled, they saw people say all sorts of different things. As very normal society, very different from what they see in the West. But underneath, when you saw the funerals of the guards, the generals of the Revolutionary Guards, we saw millions on the streets of Tehran. They miscalculated. They believe the nonsense that Iran is a house of cards. It's not just about Iranians rallying to the flag. Iran always had, the Islamic Republic had a high degree of legitimacy, and this was only enhanced. So those who went along with this in neighboring areas, they made a big mistake, because they found out that Iran is much stronger than they thought and much stronger than they are. In any case, so the Israeli regime, with this collective support, they built up a network of collaborators, of spies, and which has been dismantled to a very large degree. And they gave it their best shot. A blitzkrieg attack, slaughtering ordinary people to get at these generals at home among their family, slaughtering their neighbors, creating hatred across the Iranian public, but also it showed the world that it is, because if you recall, in the past, there are always these people who do not do anything for the Palestinian people, and they're usually people who get money, or they're somehow affiliated to this oil and gas money in our region, and a lot of that oil and gas money, by the way, goes to third parties as well. I don't want to explain further, but for example, there's a government in our region that gets money from another government in our region, Qatar, to do their own state propaganda. I won't name the country, but I don't think that's very difficult to guess what I'm talking about. But anyway, so people across, these people have always been trying to downplay the significance of what Hezbollah did to help Gaza, downplay what Yemen did. And then throughout, they were saying the Iranians, they're not, even though it's the Iranians who were helping the resistance and in Gaza. One of the martyrs was a general who was in charge of the Palestine file. He was the person who was in charge of giving the support needed in order to sustain the resistance in Gaza. He was martyred by the Israeli regime. But in any case, by attacking Iran, those people who basically were trying to justify the inaction and their collaboration of their own governments with the Israeli regime, they have no argument left because Iran remains steadfast throughout. Iran continues to support the Palestinian cause as before. And so they've enhanced Iran's position, not just inside the country. Not only has Iran been strengthened inside the country, but Iran has become popular across the region and across the world. So see how things have been reversed. For decades, Iran was demonized. We were evil. We were backward. We were a theocracy. The mullahs, mad mullahs, evil mullahs. That narrative was something that I grew up with. And you could, you always had to try to convince people that Iran is not this crazy land that you hear about. It's a normal country. But it was hard. People now see through the facade. People see, except for those who are willfully blind, they see the reality that it's the resistance, the axis of resistance. It's Iran and Yemen that are on the right side of history. None of these other governments are. It's the axis of resistance. No one else. No one else. All the others are on the wrong side of history. So Iran has been strengthened at home. Iran has been strengthened abroad. And this was, and those who are conspiring against Iran in the region, they're suddenly facing this reality. And also, by the way, there are clear signs that countries in our region are worried now by Netanyahu because they see themselves, only Iran has been able to beat back, and Yemen, beat back the regime. But all these other countries are vulnerable. So some of them are actually sending subtle signals to Iran about strengthening the relationship. Some continue to be working in parallel with the Israeli regime. It's very saddened to see how, for example, we see, they hope to use this opportunity to undermine, for example, Armenia. They thought that didn't work, and it's not going to work. But instead of aligning together to deal with the Israeli regime, they continue to do trade and business with the regime, and they try to weaken Iran and Russia on the other hand. In other words, they're basically working in parallel and in alliance with the Israeli regime, some of these people. It's quite, it's just very, cannot explain it. What goes on in the minds of these people. But in any case, things have changed. Things have changed after the war. Things have changed in the region. Things have changed for the Israeli regime, and things have changed for Iran. But Iranians know that if there is a second round, it's going to be far worse for the Israelis because they gave it their best shot, as I said. They're not going to have that opportunity again. Iran is going and the Israelis have what Zelensky can only dream of. So the Iranians know what the Israelis have. They've dismantled a lot of their capabilities. And now the Iranians are going to build up a capability to counter what's left of those capabilities. And they're going to improve their offensive capabilities. And they're going to be able to, next time around, hit much harder. And by the way, if the war had lasted a few more days, Iran would have struck the Israelis much harder. Now, some people say, why didn't the Iranians continue? It's not so simple. War, first of all, getting people killed it's not, the point is not to have people killed as much as possible. But also, the Iranians all have to begin to look and to prepare themselves for the future. While Iran won, it's clear the Israelis were begging for a ceasefire. The Americans needed the ceasefire. The Americans, as I said, gave concessions. Some of those concessions are now coming out. Others probably will not come out or may come out later. But it's clear that they got concessions. So Trump admitted it when he said the Iranians can trade their oil to China. What does that have to do with anything? It wasn't even a part of the conversation. It's clear that even he was admitting this. But also Iran has to strengthen itself. But I think that this was an important chapter because the Israeli regime has been diminished. It's no longer invincible. The popular sentiment in the region has changed. And then we're also seeing the dirty work that's being carried out in Syria, where this, Qatar and Israel and Erdogan and NATO, they're destroying what's left of this beautiful country. Syria is it's an extraordinary place with thousands of years of heritage. I've seen some of these places. They're among, they're just unbelievable. It's a beautiful country. It's civilization makes Western civilization look like nothing in comparison. It's thousands of years old, and look what they've done to this country through this joint operation of using Salafists and Wahhabi Takfiris to slaughter people, and it's so sad. And what they did to Afghanistan and to part of Pakistan, because part of Pakistan too was infiltrated by this ugly culture of extremism and this Takfiri ideology. They've done the same Syria, and even in Turkey. Sometimes when I go to Turkey, people come up to me and say things that just, it's amazing. I never thought I would see that in a country like Turkey, which is, Turkey is very similar to Iran, the culture, because people are Sufi, and Sufi ideology, Sufism and Shia are very close. And then you see this, these nodes of Salafism and Takfiri ideology sort of expanding in Turkey. It's very sad.
Professor Marandi, you mentioned the case of Iran, how Iran is getting prepared to defend itself if Israel attacks. But when it comes to the United States and their strategy, it seems that whatever comes out of the Trump administration or the Senate and whatever Lindsey Graham is trying to do together with Blumenthal, they trying to put sanctions, secondary sanctions or secondary tariffs, if to put it the way that they're talking about, tariffs on Russia. And I would assume Iran is part of that bill. It's all about China and India. When it comes to China, do you feel that considering what we've seen during the tariff war between the United States and China, is the United States capable of going against China? And because if they're not receiving energy from Iran and Russia, I don't know who else can provide them with energy.
Yeah, exactly. Who's going to replace it? And then also, in addition to that, is China going to, put up a white flag and say we're going to purchase our oil from wherever you say we should? Are they going to make themselves completely vulnerable to the United States? China needs Iranian and Russian oil and Russian gas in order to have a degree of security, so that if the United States puts pressure on its proxies to cut off ties or to decrease economic cooperation with China, that they would not be hit hard. So China knows that if Iran is weakened, if Russia is weakened, then China is going to be next. And ultimately, the biggest objective is not Iran or Russia. The hatred for Iran is because of Zionism, because the West is governed by Zionism, and Iran is the sole leads the small camp of resilient resistance, axis of resistance. And so they despise Iran, they despise Ansarullah, they despise Hezbollah, they despise Hamas and Islamic Jihad because of Zionism. But their hatred for China is different because China is their global rival. It's the global rival to the United States, and therefore, and China knows that they have, they can, if they are weakened, the Americans will destroy them. Just like Russia, the Russians know that if the Americans and the Europeans and NATO get the upper hand, then that's it for Russia. That's why for Russia, this war is existential. Whatever you may think about the root causes of the war, I personally think that when you put all the evidence, when you look at all the evidence, it's the West that's to blame for the war in Ukraine more than anyone else, by far. But in any case, for Russia, this is an existential war. For China, it is the same. But the Chinese know that ultimately, since they are the rival of the United States has, they're not going to cut a deal with the United. They're not going to. The United States is not going to accept uh, um, a China that is equal, let alone a China that is more advanced than the United States. So China is not going to raise the white flag, as I said. And also the United States is marginalizing itself further by, threatening India, by threatening countries across the world with tariffs, with punishment. It's not doing itself any favors. I'm sure they think that they'll have some sort of success. Otherwise, they wouldn't pass these laws. But my experience is, personally, my understanding is that the leaders in the West, they live in a bubble and they believe in their own exceptionalism and they are fooled by their own arrogance. And just like with Iran, they thought Iran was a house of cards. Trump thought that, if Netanyahu just engaged in a few days of war and it would be over and, it's not. Actually, they made things worse. Iran is much more powerful, much stronger at home, much more popular abroad. With regards to the nuclear program, you now have a situation where Iran's nuclear program is Iran, it's everything is now ambiguous. No one knows, or at least I don't know. The West definitely doesn't know. So now they don't have any. They blinded themselves. So in a way, by damaging Fordo or Natanz or the site in Esfahan, which are not huge sites. They're not industrialized, they're small. They're basically for Iran to have the technology so that tomorrow, if it's necessary, they would be able to make it in industrial scale. But the knowledge is there, the capability is there, the country produces its own centrifuges. So the industrial infrastructure is there. And the Americans, now the Europeans will have much more, it will be much more difficult for them to figure out what goes on in Iran. So I think it was failure across the board. Yes, damage was done to the country. That's what happens in war. But people feel they won. And the government, and now if the Europeans go, use snapback and go, revive the UN resolutions, those sanctions they're already being applied. We're living under maximum pressure sanctions. Iran's trade relationships with the rest of the world are being carried out despite maximum pressure sanctions. So no new sanctions will be added. UN and countries don't respect the UN Security Council sanctions like they did before, especially now that they see what the US and the West have done to Iran. I mean, look at North Korea now. Look at the relationship between Russia and North Korea. Things have changed. So the UN is not the UN of old, and the West does not have the control that it had of old. The snapback actually is going to weaken the West because they will have no more leverage at all. That's the end. That's their last. That's the last tool that they had in the toolbox. First, now it's nuclear ambiguity. Now they've used their last weapon against Iran. And when they don't have that, Europe becomes completely irrelevant, and the United States has no leverage. So they're not doing themselves any favors, but the West is still trapped in its Western elites. They're trapped in their own bubble, in their arrogance. They still think that they're exceptional, that they'll somehow win, that they are smarter than the rest of us, that they're at the end of the day, the rest of us will be undermined. And that's not happening. What they're doing is they're undermining themselves, and they've exposed themselves to be basically no better than Epstein.
Professor Marandi, we know that Netanyahu, during the visit that he had with Donald Trump, said he was mentioning the case of humanitarian city in the southern part of Gaza, in Rafah. When it comes to this sort of concept, it's not something new. They had it before, but to talk about it and to mention it during the meeting, do you think that in their mind it's a viable, it's somehow achievable in their mind? Because you see capitulated Yemen is going back and sinking ships, and that are heading to Israel. How can they imagine they can do such a thing to Gazans, to Palestinians?
And Hezbollah is also, they're prepared to defend Lebanon, let's say. But I think it's becoming increasingly clear that the Israeli regime and the Americans, the collective West, everything they've done has been one miscalculation after another. If anyone right now, after our discussion, they go to the South African report, the complaint to the ICJ. Remember when they gave that 84-page long report? I'm not quite sure how long it was, and the statements made by the regime's prime minister, the minister of genocide, and other senior officials, and their genocidal intent was very clear, that they wanted to exterminate the Palestinian people. It was clear. But if you go and look at the statements made, they were promising swift victory over Gaza. And Netanyahu and the likes of Netanyahu have been making these promises for almost 2 years now. It's always where they're always on the verge of victory, but they haven't achieved it. And as I said, Zionism is like acid. It's corrosive. It's destroying. They've destroyed themselves. They're slaughtering tens of children a day. True, they're murdering 100 Palestinians a day, every day, on average, and they're imposing hunger. But every child that dies is destroying the Israeli regime. Every woman that's killed, every maimed kid is destroying the regime. Every image that people see online across the world is further destroying not just the Israeli regime, the German regime, the British regime, the French regime, the Canadian regime, the Australian regime, the New Zealand regime, the whole EU. All of them are being demolished by each and every crime that they're committing in Gaza. This is not a victory. They cannot achieve victory. Even talking about it, building a concentration camp makes this work. The Israeli regime will not succeed. They are destroying themselves, just like with Epstein. They used Epstein with great success, I'm sure. Through Epstein, I'm sure they've been able to change the course of events and policy making in the United States for decades, and other Epsteins. And I'm sure they're out there, as I said earlier. But ultimately, when they're exposed, every single girl that was passed on to him and to others, that girl is has is ripping down the regime, is tearing down the regime. It's tearing down the BBC. Every one of them is tearing down the New York Times, CNN, Washington Post, Western think tanks, all the different foundations and think tanks. All of these institutions are being ripped apart. If the acid is destroying them. So, the more crimes they commit, the more they are discrediting themselves, they're destroying themselves in the eyes of their own people and in the eyes of the rest of the world. In a sense, the Israeli regime is already dead. It's already dead. It's despised across the world. And every child that dies and every statement that they make that exposes their shameless and shameless behavior and their shameless intent, all of these further the destruction not of just this regime, not just of Zionism, but of this evil empire. So, we all get upset when we hear, that they intend to do this, or they, or when we see images of what's going on in Gaza, or what they do to women and children in Lebanon, or what they've done to Syria through their evil coalition in the region and abroad. But all of this is bringing down this centuries-old empire. All of this is people across the region and across the world have no respect for the West. The West, especially after the fall of the Soviet Union, and when we reach the end of history, as Fukuyama once called it, they depicted themselves, and many people believed it as the end of history. Even after some people began to criticize it, but I think that feeling still existed among elites across the world, and even young people, many young people, as I discussed with you before on your show. In Iran, many of my own students felt that there was something about the West and human rights and democracy, and they believed a lot of this stuff. Not everyone, but a lot of young people, especially young people, who did not see how they gave Saddam Hussein chemical weapons, how they did not see how they supported the Shah when he was gunning down people in the streets, how they did not see, what the West had done to the country. And so many of them, but then, what's happening in Gaza, what they did to Iran, what they did elsewhere, and the news about Epstein and all that is having a huge impact. People look down at these elites in the West. They don't look up at them anymore. No one looks at them with respect and says, yes, we should be more like them. I say, God forbid we become like them. It can't be worse for them. It can't be worse for the Israeli regime.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Professor Marandi.
The U.S. media has played a key role in whitewashing the horrifying crimes committed by Israel against the Palestinian people in Gaza, with the full support of the U.S. government under both Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Yet those crimes have become so blatant and so impossible to deny that slowly the U.S. media is having to admit what is actually happening. The leading U.S. newspaper, the New York Times, has been one of the leading media outlets spreading nonstop propaganda in support of Israel denying and whitewashing the crimes it committed against the Palestinian people. And yet, this July, after nearly 2 years of Israel's US-sponsored genocide in Gaza, the New York Times finally published an article admitting that what Israel is doing is indeed a genocide sponsored by the US government. And this was an article published by an Israeli scholar who served in the Israeli military, the IDF, and he's a world-renowned expert on genocide. He wrote, quote, "My inescapable conclusion has become that Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinian people. Having grown up in a Zionist home, lived the first half of my life in Israel, served in the IDF as a soldier and officer, and spent most of my career researching and writing on war crimes and the Holocaust. This was a painful conclusion to reach, and one that I resisted as long as I could. But I have been teaching classes on genocide for a quarter of a century. I can recognize one when I see one," end quote. Those were the words of Omer Bartov, who is an Israeli scholar born and educated in Israel. And today he is a professor of Holocaust and genocide studies at Brown University, an elite Ivy League school in the US. And in this article that he wrote in the New York Times, he explained how he came to this inescapable conclusion that Israel is carrying out a US-sponsored genocide against the Palestinian people. He noted that when Palestinians attacked the Israeli colonial regime in October of 2023, after Israel had carried out an illegal criminal blockade of Gaza for more than a decade, and of course, all of that context has been erased. But when Palestinians attacked the Israeli occupiers in October 2023, this scholar, Omer Bartov, initially said that it was not a genocide, although he acknowledged that Israel carried out war crimes and potentially crimes against humanity. However, he acknowledged that as Israel continued to carry out this genocide after October 2023, he noted that in May 2024, the IDF ethnically cleansed 1 million Palestinians who were sheltered in Rafah in the southern part of the Gaza Strip. And then the Israeli regime completely destroyed Rafah. And he wrote, quote, "At that point, it appeared no longer possible to deny that the pattern of IDF operations was consistent with the statements denoting genocidal intent made by Israeli leaders in the days after the Palestinian attack in October of 2023. Going on in this article, this Israeli scholar noted that Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu urged Israelis to remember Amalek, which is a reference to a biblical passage in which God tells the Israelites to, quote, "kill alike men and women, infants and sucklings," end quote, which again is genocide, complete annihilation. Then Israeli regime officials said they were fighting, quote, "human animals," end quote, so demonizing Palestinians as animals. And then Israeli officials called for, quote, "total annihilation," end quote. And the deputy speaker of Israel's parliament, Nissim Vatori, said that Israel's task must be, quote, "erasing the Gaza Strip from the face of the earth," end quote. This Israeli scholar then went on and he said, quote, "those engaged in the worldwide culture of commemoration and remembrance built around the Holocaust will have to confront a moral reckoning. The wider community of genocide scholars is now edging ever closer toward a consensus over describing events in Gaza as a genocide. In November, a little more than a year into the war, the Israeli genocide scholar Shmuel Lederman joined in the growing chorus of opinion that Israel was engaged in genocidal actions. The Canadian international lawyer William Shabas came to the same conclusion last year and has recently described Israel's military campaign in Gaza as absolutely a genocide, end quote. Now, I have to say it is incredible seeing this in the New York Times, considering that the Times has been one of the leading propagandists in support of the genocidal Israeli regime. And the New York Times itself is directly complicit in these US-sponsored crimes committed against the Palestinian people for years. This did not start in October 2023. And as recently as a few weeks ago, in June, the New York Times was still publishing articles praising Israel as a hero. The New York Times employs the extreme pro-war neoconservative columnist Bret Stephens, who's paid a very fat salary and has become very rich, vomiting out propaganda in support of the US empire and the Israeli colonial regime. In June, when the US and Israel were waging war on Iran, he published an article titled, "Israel had the courage to do what needed to be done," end quote. So this is the kind of nonsensical propaganda that the New York Times just churns out on a daily basis. And never forget how the New York Times has played a key role in printing US government lies to justify illegal US wars of aggression. Like, for instance, in the lead up to the criminal US invasion of Iraq in 2003, the New York Times published many stories falsely claiming that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, WMDs, based on lies fabricated by the CIA and other US government agencies that were obediently reprinted by the New York Times. And yet this leading US newspaper never faced any consequences over its role in justifying and being a party to these illegal US wars of aggression that blatantly violated international law. More than 1 million Iraqis died in this criminal US war. The New York Times was a party to that war, just like how the New York Times is complicit and is a party to the US-Israeli genocide in Gaza. It has printed so much propaganda. For instance, in October 2024, it printed another propaganda column by the pro-war extremist Bret Stephens titled, "We Should Want Israel to Win," in which he cheered on Israel's genocide in Gaza. And yet here we are now in July of 2025, and the New York Times can no longer deny that the US and Israel have been carrying out a genocide against the Palestinian people. And now the newspaper wants to act as though it's been on the side of justice the entire time, when in fact, the US media has been directly complicit in these crimes against humanity. And the same cynical thing is happening now in Europe, because European countries have played a key role in sponsoring Israel's genocide as well, especially Germany, which carried out one of the worst genocides in human history, and is basically always on the wrong side of history and continues to support another genocide today. And also the UK and France and many other European countries. And yet now, the former top EU diplomat, Josep Borrell, who until just a few months ago was the de facto foreign minister of the European Union, now after leaving his position as the most powerful EU diplomat, where he could have actually done something, now he admits that Israel is carrying out genocide in Gaza. These were the comments made by Josep Borrell, the former European Union foreign policy chief. Quote, "We're facing the largest ethnic cleansing operation since the end of the Second World War," that is the Nazi Holocaust, "in order to create a splendid holiday destination in Gaza. Once the millions of tons of rubble have been cleared from Gaza and the Palestinians have died or gone away," end quote. He also noted that the Israeli colonial regime is starving millions of Palestinians in Gaza, civilians, as a weapon of war, which is another genocidal crime against humanity. However, again, let's not forget that when Borrell actually had power, when he was the top EU diplomat, he facilitated Israel's genocide. He was complicit in these crimes, like the New York Times.
Yes, Europe is a garden. We have built a garden. The rest of the world, most of the rest of the world, is a jungle. And the jungle could invade the garden.
But what's clearly happening is that these US-sponsored Israeli crimes have become so blatant and so undeniable that many public officials are recognizing, wow, we need to call this out. So in a few years, if there ever is justice, like there were the Nuremberg trials against the Nazis, if there is justice, these figures are saying we need to make sure that we're on record speaking out against this genocide after for nearly 2 years we helped to facilitate it. This is even happening inside the Israeli regime itself. A former Israeli prime minister, Ehud Olmert, who is himself a war criminal, who carried out horrific crimes against the Palestinian people. This did not start in 2023. This goes back to the Nakba, the ethnic cleansing, the original genocide against the Palestinian people upon which Israel was founded in 1948. And it goes back to 1967 when Israel illegally occupied the territory of multiple Arab countries, including Syria, the Golan Heights, which is still occupied by Israel to this day, and including the Sinai Peninsula, which is part of Egypt. And ever since then, for nearly 60 years, Israel has maintained its illegal occupation of Palestinian territory and Syrian territory in violation of international law, and the US government has strongly supported it as an outpost of the US empire, as an unsinkable aircraft carrier for the US empire in this very strategic region. But today, as Israel is just carrying out a blatant genocide, it's being live streamed in broad daylight, it's become impossible to deny. So now some top Western officials, including Israeli regime officials, are saying, okay, this is a genocide, we need to speak out. This former Israeli Prime Minister, Ehud Olmert, admitted that Israel, with US support, is building a, quote, concentration camp, end quote. This is the so-called humanitarian city, which is just so diabolically cynical. The US and Israel have created this scheme involving the Boston Consulting Group. You know, these millionaires in fancy suits sitting in air-conditioned offices in the United States. They're making these plans to carry out genocide and ethnic cleansing and build concentration camps, and yet they call it a humanitarian city. And this former Israeli prime minister admitted that it's a concentration camp and it's, quote, part of an ethnic cleansing, end quote. And I have to stress, it is so important to understand that none of this would be possible without the unflinching support of the US government. Israeli media outlets like the top Israeli newspaper Haaretz have published reports admitting, citing top Israeli military officials, that Israel could not carry out this genocide without the political and diplomatic support of the US government, and most importantly, without the weapons and ammunition provided by the US government. It would be impossible. And yet the US government continues to flood Israel with billions of dollars of weapons and ammunition, including Trump himself. Soon after returning to the White House for his second term as president, he claimed he would be a peace president, but he bypassed the Congress in order to send $8 billion more worth of weapons to Israel to help it carry out this genocide. And of course, let's be very clear here. This is not just Trump and the Republicans. It's also Joe Biden and the Democrats, because this genocide started under Biden, and Biden gave Israel nearly $20 billion worth of so-called military aid. And even that term is very misleading because it's not actually aid. This is money that goes to U.S. private corporations, military contractors as part of the military industrial complex, like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon and Boeing. These huge corporations, they get the contracts from the US government, these tens of billions of dollars. They create the weapons. It is private US corporations that profit from this. It is investors in these US corporations, many of which are listed in the S&P 500 and other major stock market indices on Wall Street. So they're all profiting from this genocide. And this is all extremely well documented. No one can say they didn't know. In fact, the United Nations published a very detailed report showing how US corporations have been directly complicit in and profiting from Israel's genocide in Gaza. This United Nations report was published in July. It is titled From Economy of Occupation to Economy of Genocide. And it names some of the US corporations that are complicit in this genocide and how they've profited. And these include the biggest big tech corporations in Silicon Valley, including Google, whose parent company is Alphabet, Amazon, Microsoft. By the way, these are the corporations that have been driving investor returns in the S&P 500. They're part of the so-called Magnificent Seven, the Mag 7. These big tech corporations that have been responsible for a huge part of the gains in the S&P 500 and in the NASDAQ stock market indices in recent years. And Wall Street investors have become extremely rich, profiting off of all of this. But it's not just them. Another major U.S. corporation that has been complicit in Israel's genocide in Gaza is Palantir. Palantir was founded by the far-right Silicon Valley billionaire oligarch Peter Thiel, who is a major supporter of Donald Trump, and he previously employed the U.S. Vice President, J.D. Vance. And the Trump administration has contracted Palantir to spy on Americans, to compile a massive Big Brother-style database based on mass surveillance of U.S. citizens. And by the way, the billionaire CEO of Palantir, Alex Karp, who's a right-wing Trump supporter, he boasted that the U.S. empire is preparing for a three-front war against China, Russia, and Iran. So that's just one of these Silicon Valley corporations that is profiting from Israel's genocide in Gaza. Another U.S. corporation named in this UN report is HP, Hewlett-Packard, and IBM. And there are deep historical echoes for this because IBM was also profiting from the Nazi Holocaust. This has been very well documented. I'm reading here from The Guardian, the major British newspaper. Quote, IBM directly supplied the Nazis with technology which was used to help transport millions of people to their deaths in the concentration camps at Auschwitz and Treblinka, end quote. And here we are today, 80 years later, and the United Nations is detailing how IBM is helping Israel carry out a Holocaust against the Palestinians with the full support of the US empire. And by the way, can you guess what was the response of the Trump administration to this report published by the UN detailing the complicity of US corporations in the genocide in Gaza? Drum roll. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, a war criminal who has supported every single U.S. war of aggression, announced that the U.S. government is imposing sanctions on the United Nations human rights expert who did this investigation and published this report. This is the UN Special Rapporteur on the Human Rights of Palestinians, Francesca Albanese, who is an Italian expert in international human rights law. And she's now under sanctions by the U.S. regime for the supposed crime of detailing how U.S. corporations are profiting from a genocide.
It's obscene, frankly. But right now, I want to remind everyone that the reason why these sanctions have been imposed is the pursuit of justice. Of course, I've been critical of Israel. It has been committing genocide and crimes against humanity and war crimes, and not because I say that. There are criminal proceedings and international Court of Justice proceedings against Israel for these crimes, but also because there are companies who are profiting from it. And excuse me, I mean, I record the offensive and rude posture that has come from some of these companies in reaction to my report.
I mean, this is the level of criminality of the U.S. regime. It's not a normal government. It is a genocidal regime that is sponsoring a genocide in broad daylight. Everyone in the world can see it. It's openly admitted in the New York Times. United Nations experts are publishing reports detailing that this is a genocide. And the response of the US government is to send more weapons to speed up the genocide and to impose sanctions on the UN experts who are exposing the genocide. And you really have to admire the bravery of these UN experts like Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur, because she's being threatened directly by the US empire, by the most powerful regime on earth that has a long history of carrying out crimes against humanity and sponsoring genocide. And yet when she heard the news that the US regime had imposed sanctions on her, she lifted her fist in defiance and she said, quote, "The powerful punishing those who speak for the powerless. It is not a sign of strength, but of guilt," end quote. And I think Albanese will go down in history remembered as a hero, as someone who spoke out against this genocide and tried to do everything she could to stop this genocide, while the US regime and Wall Street and Silicon Valley and US capitalists and big corporations profited from this Holocaust. And I really need to emphasize that this is not new in history. US corporations also profited from the original Holocaust. US capitalists and US politicians like the Bush family. There are two different US presidents from the Bush dynasty, George Bush Sr., George H.W. Bush Sr., and George W. Bush, his son, both war criminals who both waged war on Iraq and carried out horrific crimes. And the father of George Bush Sr., the grandfather of George W. Bush, Prescott Bush, was himself a wealthy capitalist who also profited from doing business with Hitler, with Nazi Germany, and profited from the original Nazi Holocaust. And I want to read some comments here that were written by Andrew Feinstein, who is a left-wing South African politician who opposed the apartheid regime. And then when apartheid was finally ended in South Africa, he was a member of parliament from the ANC, the African National Congress, which was the anti-apartheid party. And he has been a very outspoken advocate for Palestinian human rights. And he wrote, quote, "It pains me to say this, and I don't do so lightly, as the son of a Holocaust survivor, as someone who has lectured on genocide prevention at Auschwitz, where my mom lost dozens of her family. But Israel is behaving like Nazis. This is not self-defense. This is not to protect Jews. This is Nazism. This is a Holocaust driven by racist white supremacy." And I think it's very accurate to compare Israeli colonialism to fascism, because fascism and colonialism are two sides of the same coin. This was famously articulated by the anti-colonial intellectual Aimé Césaire in his very important book, Discourse on Colonialism. He explained how fascism was colonialism turned inward, that the crimes carried out by the Italian fascist regime under Mussolini and the German Nazi regime under Hitler and the Japanese fascist empire, these were all the crimes committed by the European colonial empires against colonial subjects in Latin America and Africa and Asia. But those crimes were ignored because it was not people in the West, in Europe, who were the actual direct victims of those crimes. But then the fascist regimes turned those crimes inward, those same colonial policies of extermination and genocide. In fact, the Nazis got the idea of the concentration camps from the US colonialists who created concentration camps for Native Americans as they carried out genocide against the indigenous peoples of North America. And the Nazis were also inspired by the racist apartheid system of Jim Crow in the US. They borrowed those ideas and applied them to racial and ethnic minorities inside Germany and other parts of Europe. And the crimes that the Israeli regime is carrying out today, as it's run by an American, Netanyahu, who had US citizenship twice. He was raised and educated in the US. Netanyahu is an American. He's a longtime friend of Trump. These crimes that the Israeli regime is carrying out now, this genocide, these crimes are not new. It's very similar to what the British Empire did, the genocide it carried out in India, in its colonies, to what the French Empire did, its genocidal crimes in Algeria, which was a French colony, or the genocidal crimes of the Belgian Empire in Congo, or getting back to Germany, before the Nazi Holocaust, the German Empire carried out genocide in southern Africa, in modern-day Namibia. But almost no one in the West knows about those colonial crimes carried out by the European empires. They only know about the horrific crimes carried out by the fascist regimes, because those fascist regimes used the same colonial practices inside Europe. So this is the true face of the so-called democratic West. When Western imperialist countries bloviate about democracy and human rights and why they have to interfere in the internal sovereign affairs of countries all across the global South and carry out coups and regime change operations and wars and humanitarian interventions, never forget that these Western empires have carried out the worst crimes against humanity and genocide. And all of this rhetoric about democracy and human rights is completely cynical. It's completely hypocritical. These Western regimes have never actually been democratic. They've been the worst violators of democracy. And the fact that they've been supporting Israel's genocide for nearly 2 years in broad daylight, it's not a deviation from the great Western democracies of the past. It's not a perversion. It is exactly what they've been doing for centuries. This is the true face of Western imperialism. And as I conclude here, I must emphasize that it has been completely obvious from the very beginning that Israel has been carrying out genocide. The United Nations created a special committee that said as explicitly as possible that Israel is carrying out genocide with the full support of the US government. And these Western so-called human rights organizations that have often been complicit in US imperialist wars, justifying the US imperialist war on Libya and Syria, justifying imperialist US so-called humanitarian intervention, they're now trying to wash their hands of complicity in these crimes against humanity. And that's why Amnesty International also in 2024 admitted that Israel is carrying out genocide in Gaza. And that's why now even mainstream US media outlets like the New York Times are finally admitting the truth after nearly 2 years, after 21 months of a live stream genocide we've all seen on social media every single day. Because they can clearly see that in history, students will learn about the US-sponsored, Western-sponsored Israeli genocide against the Palestinian people carried out in 2023, 2024, and 2025 in broad daylight. They will know it will not be controversial that it was genocide. So now these Western institutions are trying to save face desperately, and they're acting as though they were always on the right side of history, but don't let them erase their complicity in these horrific crimes. And never forget how they spent 2 years smearing independent journalists and activists and scholars and advocates like us here and millions of other people around the world who from the very beginning were saying that this is a genocide and that the Palestinian people need to be supported. Supporters of Palestinian human rights were viciously attacked and smeared with nonsensical claims. And now it's clear that advocates for Palestinian human rights were always on the right side of history. And don't let the people who were complicit try to whitewash all of that and erase it. On that note, I'm going to conclude. I am Ben Norton.
Right, so if hypocrisy were a currency, southern Syria would be one of the richest places on earth right now, as HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the self-anointed saviours of post-Assad Syria, Al-Qaeda cosplaying as legitimate politicians, as they really are, promise protection on one hand, whilst punishing the very minorities it claims to represent, and which has become emblematic of the rule of their leader, Ahmed al-Sharaa, who is still better known as the terrorist al-Jilani, no matter how many Western leaders shake his hand and endorse him. Israel, meanwhile, wraps itself in the cloaks of humanitarianism as it bombs Druze villages and casually entertains regime assassination, all as al-Jilani still wants to normalise relations with Israel. And caught between these two moral bankrupts are the Druze, proud, stubborn, and historically impossible to subdue, now forced to choose between being branded collaborators or rebels by one side or the other, regardless of which side they actually choose. The mountain of the Druze has roared before, and if history is any guide, those who think they can play kingmaker on its slopes are in for a rather nasty surprise. Right, so southern Syria is again drowning in blood, betrayal and hypocrisy. Suwaida, long known as the mountain of the Druze, has always been a byword for resilience and stubborn autonomy, a place where survival has depended on rejecting domination by both imperial and domestic rulers. Today, that same mountain has been turned into a battlefield where two very different powers, HTS's religious extremist-led transitional government in Damascus and Israel, having invaded southern Syria post-Assad and continuing to make itself at home there, are locked in a cynical struggle. Both claim to be protectors. HTS frames itself as the future of a united Syria, while Israel insists its intervention is purely humanitarian. Both of them are lying. The reality is far more brutal. Nearly 30 Druze fighters were killed in a single HTS operation, according to, for example, Press TV, and Kurdistan 24 reports that at least 89 people, mostly civilians and local fighters, have been killed in the latest wave of violence. Israel, claiming to defend the Druze, bombed Suwaida just hours after a ceasefire was announced, as Al Jazeera confirmed, further devastating already weakened infrastructure. The present crisis is only the latest chapter in a long history of betrayal, though. The Druze have repeatedly been promised protection and autonomy by Central Powers, only to be manipulated and attacked when they asserted their independence. Under Ottoman rule, Druze mountain strongholds enjoyed a degree of self-governance, but faced repeated punitive campaigns when they resisted imperial authority. The French Mandate initially promised minority self-rule, yet when the Druze, led by Sultan al-Atrash, launched the Great Syrian Revolt of 1925, the French responded with bombardments and brutal repression. This history cemented a collective memory of betrayal that informs Druze politics to this day. Even under the Assad dynasty, the pattern persisted. Hafez al-Assad relied on co-opting Druze elites into the Ba'athist system while keeping the broader community politically marginalized and economically neglected. In return for nominal loyalty, the Druze were left alone. But when jihadist militias attacked Druze villages during the civil war, Bashar al-Assad's government offered little real protection. This explains why Druze protesters earlier this year demanded local governance, greater autonomy, and an end to forced conscription. Their demands are not new, and nor are they particularly radical. Historically, the Druze have relied on self-autonomy and pragmatic alliances to maintain security, but that strategy is failing due to the mess southern Syria now lies in. HTS refuses to tolerate local autonomy, and Israel's intervention has made pragmatism dangerous. Any cooperation risks branding the Druze as collaborators in the eyes of other Syrians. HTS's rise to power was hailed by far too many who were ready to forgive a guy who not so long ago had a $10 million bounty on his head for terror offences, if it meant the end of Assad. The promise of a new beginning for an all-new and inclusive Syria, because Salafist religious extremists were bound to deliver that, weren't they? Ahmed al-Sharaa promised that all Syrians, including minorities, would be respected partners in rebuilding the country. The events in Suwaida, not to mention all the months of HTS persecution of other minorities like the Alawites and Christians, have exposed that promise as completely empty rhetoric. HTS's failure is not merely incompetence, it is deliberate negligence and coercion too. For weeks before the latest clashes, Bedouin tribal militias terrorized Druze villages with kidnappings, highway robberies and attacks. The Long War Journal has reported that these provocations sparked retaliatory violence by Druze militias, escalating into open fighting. HTS security forces failed to intervene, standing by while tensions worsened. And when they finally acted, it was not to protect civilians, but to crush resistance. Nearly 30 Druze fighters were killed in a single operation, as aforementioned. The Suwaida Military Council, quoted by MPA Syria, accused Damascus of standing by while our villages burned, then sending troops to punish those who defended them. And certainly we saw abuses like that on social media, Syrian forces coming in and forcibly shaving off the mustaches of Druze men, which is considered a sin to them. This was not an isolated incident, but part of a strategy to weaken local self-defense forces and force minorities into submission. By tolerating tribal violence and then intervening punitively, HTS sends a clear message that autonomy will not be tolerated by this unelected, Western-endorsed extremist regime. HTS's ideological baggage makes its promises of inclusivity even less believable, though it now brands itself as a nationalist movement. Its jihadist origins are fresh in the minds of Syria's minorities, and certainly their actions in recent months have lent plenty of credence to that. For communities that remember HTS's campaigns in Idlib and Latakia, where minorities were treated as second-class citizens, and far worse since taking power, massacres, particularly amongst Alawites, this suspicion is completely justified. Most damning is HTS's pursuit of foreign approval at the expense of domestic legitimacy. Reports in Times of Israel, amongst others, ever since Assad was deposed, really, have shown that Damascus has been exploring diplomatic channels with Israel. They want normalized relations with them. For the Druze, this is an unforgivable betrayal. A government that will not protect its own citizens, but courts the same power bombing its territory, cannot claim to be a legitimate representative of Syria. If HTS's failure lies in neglect and coercion, though, Israel's failure is rooted in hypocrisy and manipulation. Now, you might be thinking at this point, well, hang on, Damo. Israel like the Druze, don't they? Well, Israel has presented itself as a protector of Syria's Druze minority, but this is a narrative crafted for strategic convenience. It continues to occupy the Golan Heights, as we know, seized by Israel from Syria in 1967 during the Six-Day War, and Israel has no intention of withdrawing. Yet it demands that HTS forces withdraw from southern Syria, as AP News have reported. This double standard exposes Israel's true motive, therefore. Maintaining a de facto buffer zone under its control and protecting the Druze is a convenient excuse to cover for that. The Druze also form much of the population of the Golan Heights, you see. So by invoking protectionism of the Druze, it excuses Israel's presence in southern Syria too. But its airstrikes on Suwaida, a Druze city, justified as humanitarian interventions, have only worsened civilian suffering there. As the English version of the Syrian news outlet Enab Baladi have reported, these strikes destroyed critical infrastructure, deepening the humanitarian crisis there. By targeting HTS forces while ignoring Bedouin tribal militias, Israel has deliberately kept the south fragmented, ensuring that minorities remain dependent on alleged Israeli protection. The mask of humanitarian concern fell completely through, though, when Amichai Chikli, Israel's diaspora affairs minister, called for al-Shara's assassination, describing him as a terrorist who should be eliminated without delay. Now, it's a horrid sensation on my part to agree with that description of al-Shara coming from a member of all people, Netanyahu's government, but this is not the language of a state interested in stabilization here either. It's the language of regime change once more. And Syria is on Israel's Greater Israel Project list, after all. It also makes al-Shara's ongoing calls for Israeli normalization with Syria even harder to swallow amongst the Syrian people of all denominations. Israel can do what it likes in Syria, it seems, and al-Shara will still want diplomatic ties with them. It's all quite mad, and an utter failure of the people that al-Shara purports to now rule. For the Druze, Chikli's words are a double-edged sword, though. Many have tolerated Israeli involvement out of pragmatism, but open calls for regime decapitation makes them targets for reprisals by HTS all the more now, which now frames any minority demands for autonomy as Israeli collaboration, such as their extremism. The crisis in southern Syria is a product of a toxic feedback loop, therefore. HTS's negligence and coercion created a power vacuum. Israel have exploited that vacuum militarily, claiming to protect minorities while destabilizing the region further. Weakened by Israeli pressure and driven by their own religious extremism, HTS cracked down harder on minorities, provoking more resistance. That resistance, in turn, justifies further Israeli strikes. But this cycle traps the Druze in an impossible position. If they defend themselves against HTS, they become branded outlaws. If they accept Israeli assistance, they become branded collaborators. Either way, they suffer. The greatest tragedy of this double betrayal is the human cost. Civilians in Suwaida are caught between Israeli bombs, HTS crackdowns, and Bedouin militias. Hospitals, therefore, unsurprisingly, are overwhelmed, with shortages of medical supplies and electricity. Displacement is rising, with hundreds fleeing to nearby villages or even attempting to cross into Jordan. Psychologically, the toll is immense as well. Minority communities, the once identified strongly with the Syrian state, are losing faith in its future. The Druze, who are historically amongst the most resilient of Syrians, are asking a painful question of themselves, that if both Damascus and Tel Aviv treat them as expendable, do they still have a future in Syria at all? If these dynamics continue, southern Syria could become the next major flashpoint amid all the regional warfare we're seeing, mostly instigated by Israel, but in this case the new Syrian administration is just as bad as Israel. What began as a local conflict risks escalating into a confrontation, pulling in more regional state actors and allies. The Druze face grim choices, therefore. Submitting to HTS means enforced marginalization and suppression of their historic autonomy. Accepting Israeli protection offers temporary security, but permanent vulnerability to accusations of collaboration. Negotiated autonomy is the only sustainable solution here, but this would require unprecedented international pressure on both HTS and Israel to deliver, which is, as we know, completely non-existent in the current geopolitical climate, when the West is forging stronger ties with both. The Druze and other minorities do have agency. There are discussions of stronger coordination between Druze militias, Christian groups, and even disaffected Sunni factions to form a counterweight to HTS dominance. But without external support, such alliances are unlikely to shift the balance of power. HTS governs like Assad did, just in a more extremist religious fashion, while Israel claims to be a protector even as it bombs indiscriminately and now openly calls for regime change. Both have treated minorities as expendable. But the Druze are not passive victims here. History shows that every attempt to subdue them has only strengthened their resolve. Chikli's call for al-Shara's assassination may prove to be a major strategic blunder on Israel's part. By turning southern Syria into an explicit regime change battlefield, Israel risks creating the very instability it claims to fear, while alienating the Druze it purports to protect. HTS2 cannot continue governing for foreign approval while ignoring the legitimate grievances of its own people. If either power truly wants stability, it has to abandon this cynical game and respect minority rights. You just can't see it happening. Extremists as both sides are, it just doesn't look very likely, does it? A not dissimilar picture is emerging in Lebanon too. The Lebanese also caught between Israel and Syria. The threats to the Lebanese government to forcibly disarm Hezbollah or else being the driving narrative behind that, despite Israel also illegally occupying territory that isn't theirs. But unlike the Druze, there's a more concerted pushback happening here. Check out all the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like.
So no more talking, no more issuing condemnations of Israel's genocide and their ethnic cleansing, no more resolutions. Look, we're actually going to do something. We're actually going to block their ships. We're actually going to stop their ships from docking at ports. We're going to block supplies going to Israel. That's what actually is going to happen now. That's actually happening now. Exclusive: Spain and Ireland to join more than 20 states to declare concrete measures against Israel. Turkey, Portugal, China, Qatar are among countries that will be attending the Hague's Group's Emergency Summit in Colombia next week. This is real. More than 20 countries are convening in Bogota next week to declare concrete measures against Israel's violations of international law. Diplomats told Middle East Eye. That's really happening. And if you'd like to hear my jokes about it, I'll be doing them this Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday in Toronto, Red Bank, New Jersey, Northampton, Massachusetts, and Concord, New Hampshire. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets. The emergency summit is due to be held on 15th and 16th of July. So that's starting tomorrow, right? Co-hosted by the governments of Colombia and South Africa and co-chairs of the Hague Group to coordinate diplomatic and legal action to counter what they describe as a climate of impunity enabled by Israel and its powerful allies. So 20 countries have said, we've had enough. And here it is, Progressive International. The Hague Group of 9 nations announced their commitment to bring Netanyahu to justice, stop arms to Israel, and no harbor for genocide. Let's listen.
We then declare our intention to uphold the UN resolution A/Res/ES10/24 in the case of state parties to the International Criminal Court to support and comply with our obligations under the Rome Statute with regards to the warrants issued on 21st of November 2024 and to implement the provisional measures of the International Court of Justice issued on 26th of January, also on the 28th of March, and also on the 24th of May, 2024. We declare our intention to prevent provision or transfer of arms, munitions, and related equipment to Israel in all cases where there's a clear risk that such arms and related items might be used to commit or facilitate violations of humanitarian law, international human rights law, or the prohibition on genocide, in compliance with our international obligations and consistent with the International Court of Justice advisory opinion of 19 July 2024 and the UN General Assembly Resolution A/Res/ES10/24. We declare our intention to prevent the docking of vessels at any port, if applicable, within our territorial jurisdiction, in all cases where there's a clear risk of the vessel being used to carry military fuel and weaponry to Israel.
So they're talking about actually stopping the shipment of arms or aid to Israel. Those 20 countries are actually talking about stopping the docking at a port if they think it's going to go to aid the arms shipments to Israel. That's a big deal.
Which might be used to commit or facilitate violations of humanitarian law, of international human rights law, and of the prohibition of genocide in Palestine, in keeping with the state's peremptory legal obligation to cooperate towards preventing genocide and other violations.
So what he's saying is like, hey, we're actually the ones upholding international law, not the United States, not Israel. We're the ones who are actually going to do this now, because nobody pays attention to the ICJ or the ICC. Nobody pays attention to the UN resolutions. Nobody does anything. Those are just words. Well, we're actually going to do something. We're actually going to block ports. We're actually going to stop ships from docking that are going to take any kind of aid to Israel that they can use to do their genocide. That's what he's saying, that they're actually going to do now. Countries are actually joining together now because they see that the United Nations isn't going to do anything. The United States isn't going to do anything. Europe, the European Union isn't going to do anything. So now these 20 countries are coming together to do something.
Norms by all legal measures at their disposal.
The Hague Group is a bloc of currently 8 states launched on 31st of January in Dutch city that has stated a goal of holding Israel accountable under international law. The Hague Group's formation in January marked a turning point in the global response to exceptionalism and the broader erosion of international law. The same spirit will animate this Bogota conference, where the assembled states will send a clear message. No nation is above the law, and no crimes will go unanswered. Together, we will work to introduce concrete legal, diplomatic, and economic measures that can urgently halt Israel's destruction of the Palestinians. So legal, diplomatic, and economic measures. So and I like they use the word concrete. Israel's war on Gaza, increasingly condemned by experts and governments as a genocide, has killed more than 57,000 Palestinians. I don't even know how they come up with that number, because I bet it's more closer to 400,000. Because most of those people,
I've always thought that
most of those people are underneath that rubble, and nobody's going. So it's way more than 57,000 people. I can guarantee you that.
Just like Lahain is more than 150 people.
The onslaught has left the Palestinian enclave barely habitable and left 2 million people starving. The Palestinian genocide threatens our entire multilateral system. Colombia cannot be indifferent in the face of apartheid and ethnic cleansing. In Bogota, the assembled states will not only reaffirm our commitment to resist the genocide, but devise a series of specific measures to move from words to collective action. So no more talking, no more issuing condemnations of Israel's genocide and their ethnic cleansing, no more resolutions. We're actually going to do something. We're actually going to block their ships. We're actually going to stop their ships from docking at ports. We're going to block supplies going to Israel. That's what actually is going to happen now. That's actually happening now.
Well, did you know Argentina, I don't see up there, because Malay is providing safe haven to IDF war criminals
that's right.
Film themselves on TikTok doing crimes. Yeah. They're fleeing to Argentina.
The founding members of the group included Bolivia, Colombia, Cuba, Honduras, Malaysia, Namibia, and Senegal and South Africa. Here's all the delegations. Republic of Colombia, South Africa, Algeria, Bolivia, Botswana, Brazil, the Federative Republic of Brazil, Chile, China, Cuba, Djibouti, Honduras, Indonesia, Iraq, Ireland, Lebanon, the state of Libya, Malaysia, United Mexican states, Republic of Namibia, Nicaragua, Norway, Oman, Pakistan, Portugal, Portuguese Republic, the state of Qatar, Republic of Slovenia, the Kingdom of Spain, Turkey, what else? Uruguay, and the Venezuela. So members of the Hague Group have already taken major steps over the past 20 months to defend and enforce international law. South Africa, for example, brought a landmark case against Israel at the International Court of Justice for alleged violations of genocide convention in Gaza. Several states in the coalition later joined South Africa's case at the ICJ. Additionally, Namibia and Malaysia blocked ships carrying arms to Israel from docking at their ports, while Colombia has cut diplomatic ties with Israel. Since these efforts have been taken independently, the Hague Group aims to coordinate actions amongst its member states and supporters for a stronger impact. According to the group's coordinator, the group has been formed in part as a reaction to the non-compliance of states with binding international legal obligations. This is a reference to the pushback by a number of Western states against the International Criminal Court's arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his former defense minister, Yoav Gallant, in November of 2024, and Israel's failure to comply with multiple orders by the ICJ to ensure that genocide convention is not violated in Gaza. Zuck Fionism says this is really needed more than anything. If the Western governments are together in trampling the international law, the rest of the world should get together to uphold it and make them toe the line. And so that's what's happening. The rest of the world is starting to stand up. China is starting to stand up. And Israel is going to become a pariah state. I keep saying going to become. They are. And again, they've lost everyone.
Jews, the young ones, not the old ones, the young ones that you needed, that they sent them that birthright trip to indoctrinate. It's failing on them.
Okay. So there you go. The world has now turned on Israel, except, the United States and the European Union. But Ireland is in there. Norway's in there.
Well, the actual people, just like those Arab countries that where their population will overthrow them if they don't placate them, that, we're going to make sure the Palestinians aren't all murdered. The leaders. So when you hear these scumbag Israelis go, well, how come the Arabs don't take them? They don't like it. No, that's the leaders of those countries that don't like. The people are real mad about it, actually.
Hey, come see us on tour. We're going to be in Toronto, Red Bank, New Jersey, Northampton, Massachusetts, Concord.
A lot of us don't know who Zoran Mamdani is. He's running to be the mayor of New York. Let's talk about him and see why a lot of Black Americans just don't trust him.
Do you like capitalism?
No, I have many critiques of capitalism. And I think ultimately the definition for me of why I call myself a democratic socialist is the words of Dr. King decades ago. He said, call it democracy or call it democratic socialism. There must be a better distribution of wealth for all of God's children in this country. And that's what I'm focused on is dignity and taking on income inequality.
But I got to say, guys, no more using Martin Luther King's voice, name, likeness, quotes in your shit like whatever that is you're doing, man. Yeah. Use somebody from Turkey or Istanbul, wherever you're from. Use that. Stop. And it's not just for Zoran, it's for anybody. Stop using MLK.
Eric Adams is at 20%, Cuomo's at 7%, and the official Democratic nominee is Zoran at 72%. He won over, everybody making over $100,000 a year voted for the guy, and here's one of the reasons, obviously. He is appealing to a demographic of people who are understandably and understand what I'm saying here because they're not wrong, understandably frustrated that their level of education has not turned into income. And these people were told their entire life that all they had to do to make money was to get a college degree. This is a generation of people that were told that the route to comfort and security was education. And all of those people then graduated from schools in an alarming amount of debt. The constituency that's powering Mamdani's campaign is, by the numbers, a higher educated, higher income group. But they're not high income compared to what you would need to feel rich in New York. I don't feel rich in New York, and I make a hell of a lot more money than these zeros. Now, it doesn't mean that Mamdani's wrong about wealth inequality in America and specifically in New York. He's correct about that. It's the same issue that Donald Trump built a coalition around: fairness. Trump's coalition focused obviously more on immigration, a populist, nationalist uprising against elites in education, media, wherever. Mamdani has a similar thing. It's a populist uprising, but instead of being directed at the elites in media and entertainment, because they largely, many of them are supporting him, not the big elites, not the billionaires. What I'm saying is the big boys and girls, the big institutional money doesn't like the guy. But the rank and file in the media and entertainment kind of like him. So their populist rage is not directed that way.
I agree with Tim Dillon on this, man. And I was making a note here. Here it goes. MAGA. MAGA was people that were frustrated with not being able to achieve the American dream after hard work, being able to raise their families and putting in the time at a job and not seeing the results of that come back for them and their children. Same thing here with the educated, the college educated and the high earners, or people that want to make high earners, who went to these schools and created all this debt, and they're coming up with the same point of view that, hey, where's the American dream for me? I feel like I'm being hosed. These are the same two issues, but from vastly different vantage points, all right, and different solutions for them. But when you hit the pain, that's the pain. That's where the pain hurts. Ow, ow. That's what the pain hurts. There are people that say, hey, they respond to that, okay? They respond to the message because they all feel the same pain.
And coming to terms with something that really reshapes what's possible and what a coalition looks like, it may take some people time. And what's so exciting to me is that this was a campaign that was laser focused on an economic agenda and on making clear that every New Yorker belongs in this city. They deserve the same respect, the same recognition. And ultimately, what good is it if we call this the greatest city in the world if the people who built it can't afford to live here? And the increased turnout, it's not just generational. I also say this as the first South Asian elected official, the first Muslim elected official to ever run for mayor. The turnout in those same communities has been incredible to see.
Hello, I'm Andrew Cuomo. And unless you've been living under a rock, you probably know that the Democratic primary did not go the way I had hoped. To the 440,000 New Yorkers who voted for me, a sincere thank you. Thank you for believing in me, in my agenda, and in my experience. And I am truly sorry that I let you down. But as my grandfather used to say, when you get knocked down, learn the lesson and pick yourself back up and get in the game. And that is what I'm going to do.
When you look at the comparison between the two, you kind of see why they didn't go with Cuomo. Because he's up there apologizing. Hey, he lost. Yeah, so I didn't win. He should apologize to all the women. Maybe apologize to all the people that died in the nursing homes. But hey, rookie mistake. Pretending like it didn't happen was probably a better way to go, huh? When I hear Zoran talk, though, I can't help but think, pew. I'm just somebody who just doesn't buy this shit. I just hear rhetoric. I hear talking, but I try to say, you know what, though? I get it. If you're up against Cuomo, you're up against Adams, I could see why people would roll the dice with this guy. I'd probably just hit the couch, but I get why they might do what they did.
Running around the streets of New York saying,
free taxis, free subway, free buses for you, free everything. And of course, if you don't understand what that means long term, you might vote for him. They certainly are proposing that. And so this is a classic case of reading Atlas Shrugged. I got my kids reading it, and they're freaking out reading that thing, because that's exactly what it's proposing. You can't do this in an environment where there's competition of other states. The money just leaves. The tax base leaves. The capital leaves. The developer leaves. The risk capital leaves. And you're left with a collapsing environment. New York City is it's a horrible message for the American dream. This guy is turning New York into the American nightmare. The money comes in, it flies right over New York City, and it lands somewhere else. That's the problem.
Red flags about Zoran. Here goes a couple red flags I got to point out. 5 things off the top of the head that I wrote down that I think we should consider. People looking at Zoran, they want to know, they want to kick the tires and wondering, hey, what should I think of this guy? First thing I look at is the fact that he didn't get support from the blacks. Why didn't black people support him? Is it that they are against Muslims and Asian Americans? No, that's not it. He did not speak to any black-related issues. He did that on purpose. He was like Bernie in that way. And I already went through the ringer with Bernie, and Bernie was at MLK rallies, and Bernie got locked up fighting for civil rights, for fair housing. There's footage. Man, Dami, no such background. Okay, no such background. So I was prone to give Bernie the benefit of the doubt. But at the end of the day, you got a guy that won't speak to black concerns, black issues, black America. What's there for us? He's telling you he don't see color. He's another I don't see color guy, unless it's Asian, unless it's Indian, unless it's Muslim. And Muslim, we know it's not a color, but you know. Bernie did well, and Dami did not. Black people just didn't think he passed the smell test. Number 2, controversy over the racial identification on college applications. I got to ask this, and this is the thing that I don't know why people were giving him a pass on this. And then I get it. These people are more focused on their wallets, and if they think this guy will put money in their pocket, they don't care if he disrespects black people. He put on a college application, he put himself as Black American. Though he says very straight up, he's from Uganda, he ain't Ugandan. Okay, and he's Asian, right? South Asian. So why would he check black if it wasn't to gain something? What are these people that are willing to accept a BS response, a BS explanation that's totally laughable? Man, come on, man. We're not that gullible. He did it for the same reasons I believe Kamala did it. There was probably an incentive, sort of like Elizabeth Warren, when she put Native American. It was an incentive to help him with the tuition or something. He actually has money in his family. So I really don't know what he wanted to do, why he felt the need to do it, but there was a reason. And don't tell me the reason was he wants us all to get along and he was doing it as a sign of something. Nah, I don't believe that. You know, simple explanation is gonna rule. Okay. And and I'm not saying Eric Adams should become mayor because of it, but I'm saying it is an issue. And if Mayor Eric Adams checked white, you wouldn't be like, well, maybe he was just hanging out with white guys and wants to strike one foot of white solidarity. You'd be like, what's this guy doing? Okay, so yeah, it's a problem. Yeah, which only further makes my spidey senses go, what the hell is going on? This guy's lying about that. What else is he lying about? Why would you do that? Next, radical policy proposals and economic concerns. The Democratic Populist, the Democratic Socialist platform has some people going like, what the hell? There's always going to be more conservative black Americans who, when you start talking about stuff that you giving people like free bus rides, they get concerned. I actually like the grocery store thing. Hey, look, he's not talking about one on every block. He's not talking about a bodega. He's talking about a grocery store, right? That we can control the cost. That can control the cost. Some people live near food deserts, man, and they need quality food. I actually support that initiative. Yeah, like I'm trying to call balls and strikes. Keep it 100. I support grocery stores in those boroughs that people can get to that's going to be publicly accessible for anybody to live within those boroughs. They need that. How anybody could have a problem with it, I don't know. They're spending the same amount of money subsidizing Wegmans or Kroger's or whoever they got, right? But the prices get crazy at the Whole Foods. So provide the same level of quality foods. You're spending the money already, spend it in the state government related grocery store. I don't got a problem with that. If people going, oh no, this is socialism, it's scary. Yo, fam. So is the police department and the fire department. You know, these are socialistic, they derive from socialism. These are things that are funded by the state. You don't pay, you personally, your $20 or your $200 and your state taxes do not make sure, the firemen run. I mean, it's still state, right? Okay. So there are other things in the state that you take advantage of, like public libraries, the highways, the roads, the traffic signals, okay? Just put this in that bucket, this one grocery store, not 50 of them, right? But in the 5 boroughs in New York City. It's 5, right? You can do that. That makes sense. Next. Some people say controversial slogans and positions on Israel-Palestine. I feel like there was way too much to be said about this. And what I mean by that is, we got problems going on in America that require our attention. This feels like leaning into something that's going to give them a donor base more so. And I know part of him talking about it, maybe that was because people were throwing it in his face, hoping it would stop him and screw him up with Jewish voters, which is very heavy in New York City. Hey, man, I just don't give a shit what his opinion is. What's that got to do with what he's doing and what he's going to do in New York? If it's my mayor in my city, what he thinks about a international event that did not happen in America, yeah, I think about it, but I'm more concerned about what his local politics is going to be. Yeah, I'm not going to jump out the gym either way. Maybe I am more supportive that he supports Palestinians than I would be if he didn't. Only because I do see a correlation. Like, if you ain't going to go against the grain about this, what else won't you go against the grain on? But he already proven he ain't going to talk about black people shit. But after the election, basically, he met with Al to try to get Al to shut up because Al was a Cuomo guy and he was dumping on him. He's continued to stay dumping on him. So he's kind of like trying to, kiss the ring of Al Sharpton. So he went down to the National Action Network, met with Al, and played a couple Jay-Z songs with him or something. But at the end of the day, like, what? Last but not least, my 5th reason. Lack of management experience and vetting concerns. And this came up during the campaign. They said, hey, Ma'am Donnie lacks the experience to manage the city as complex as New York, citing his relatively short tenure in the New York State Assembly since 2020. Some called him the most poorly vetted candidate in history, raising questions about undisclosed aspects of his background, such as hiring a new convicted child sex offender as his communications director. Did he hire them before they got convicted or after? I'm just saying, it kind of matters when. You hire a guy before he got convicted, you might not even known about the charge. Then you find out he got the charge and you already hired him and then you got to let him go. I'm just saying, I'm not that upset about somebody lacking the experience, but I am concerned about who he's going to hire to put around him that has the experience. You understand what I'm saying? So being inexperienced is not the worst thing. I remember my brother used to come on Marcus Furrow. He used to come on the show and he was telling me that he's worked with a number of campaigns. He much prefers working with new politicians than old ones. The old ones already took all the money. They ain't gonna stop taking that money. And he's rather work with somebody new and try to get them before they become corrupted. So like, I get it. And Marcus Farrell, if you're out there, what's up, bruh? I get his point. I kind of agree with him because I see what the system does. Not everybody's willing to lose to stand on their business. You understand what I'm saying? And you definitely ain't gonna get that out of career politicians. You ain't gonna get that out of Cuomo. It's obvious you ain't gonna get that out of Adams. It's kind of showing his hand about what kind of mayor he's gonna be. So there you go. That's where I'm at. Here's my wrap up on Zoran. I don't trust Zoran, but I don't trust politicians in general. I think Zoran is saying all the right things. I think that's what politicians tend to do. They say the right things. He came with a better game plan than the people that ran against him. And he just executed on it. It was more down to earth, more approachable. All those things, and that matters. That's how he won that election so far. We'll see what happens. Do I think he's the Swiss Army knife for what Democrats need to do? Nah, they need to get real about shit. They need to get real. They need to be able to say they know what a woman is. They need to be able to say 8 years old is too young to chop off your manhood. They need to say, yeah, you know, we need to stop bombing other countries, and we need to say, hey, a border is a good thing, and then support the border. And these are things that I don't think Zoran's really down for. Any of the things I just listed, I don't think he supports. So it ain't my kind of guy, because I'm off that. We need to all kumbaya and just love everybody and bend at their will, no matter if we agree with them or not. Just to make peace, hoping that black people get something out of it. Because at the end of the day, that's not what's been happening. And I think that's why a lot of black people don't support him. Because going along with him on shit we don't agree with, just hoping on the back end he has our backs, Democrats haven't been living up to that. And a democratic socialist, maybe a socialist, it's still a Democrat. All right, that's why I come at this. Let me
every single day.
In this video, a Mexican immigrant residing in the U.S. complains about having to carry her ID when she goes places. I'm going to show her in this video. This is not new, that Americans have to carry IDs, and sometimes even when we carry IDs, we still get harassed. If you find this video interesting, hit the subscribe button.
I'm Mexican. Watch what I have to do every single fucking day. Keys. I'm just gonna go on a walk with my dog. ID. Because I need to have that on me at all times. Pass card. Copy of my pass card. Because I also need to have that on me at all times. And now I am ready to go on a walk with my dog outside my apartment complex in my community.
Next on deck.
I don't know if it's just me, but I do everything she's talking about. Every time I leave the house, except for the pass thing. Because I don't have a pass thing. But I gotta have keys. How am I supposed to get back in the house? In America, you can have keys, be in the house, and the cops will come in the house and say, hey, who are you? Why you're in the house? Because somebody says they don't think you should be in the house. But yeah, it's good to have keys.
Police department, come out with your hands up. Come out with your hands up.
Okay.
Keep walking.
Here. This is me.
Okay.
Okay. Come on out here. You don't live here.
My coach's house, Coach Rundle.
Okay.
He let me and Torrance stay here. You can call him, ask him.
Okay. Go ahead and just, for right now, just turn around. Put your hands behind your back.
Is it Keontae?
Yes, it's Keontae.
Okay. Put your hands behind your back for a second. We're just going to detain you.
Why am I being detained, though?
Because you don't live here, and the person that lived here passed away. So.
Okay. Can you guys call Coach Rundle?
Yeah, that's what we're going to do.
We'll deal with that. So nobody else is here, Keontae?
No, Torrance gone. Can you loosen the cuffs up for real?
Yep, hold on a second.
Because my wrist is a little broken.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the reason why you're here. Someone called because they.
I know, because I'm a black man and it's that lady right
So-
there, even though she waved at me.
This story has a happy ending. Keontae Furge not only did not get shot to death that day, he got awarded $150,000 in a settlement over illegal entry and detention by the Monona police. Doesn't always go that way, though. But that's a good story. You shouldn't really put keys in there. Like, people need keys. Like, where you live in? Mayberry? Can leave the doors open? You ain't got to lock the door? This is goofy. Okay, so you said your ID. I'm not Mexican, but I'm black, and I take my ID. I think most of us take ID with us because anybody can match the description.
Tonight, a black man in a predominantly white neighborhood, he goes out for a jog. Officers stop him. They say he matches a description of a suspect in a burglary, quote, a black man with a beard. And, well, then the man who had just gone for a jog, right, decides to start recording.
Hey, buddy. If you're not in any trouble or anything, there is a burglary that happened. You kind of fit the description. Let me just make sure that you're not in. Literally, they said white tank top, black shorts. And they said that you had a beard, all right?
As you can see here, this black American man, he's showing his ID. See how he has his ID at the ready for the cop? That's so he don't have to spend all day probably going down to the station or more cops coming, getting handcuffed, running all this process. He's black American. He was born in this country probably. In fact, his parents were probably born in this country. And guess what he still needs, my Mexican friend? An ID. And if the cops pull you over or stop you and you don't have ID, they'll keep you detained until they are sure who you are.
Nah, hell sir, no. He don't even know my name and tell him I have a warrant. What did he do? That's what I'm saying. For what? For what? I'm from Louisiana. For what? For what? Yeah. I don't even live in Louisiana, so how do I have a? You don't know my name, so how can you tell me I have an open warrant in Louisiana? Sir, stop. Clarence, okay, well you don't even know me. I already got you. No, you don't even know me. You don't even know my name. Why would I trust you?
Hello. What? I'm confused. He don't even live in Louisiana.
No. You don't. How can you tell me I have something you don't know my name?
I don't know if you've been in the country a long time. You must not have been. That's common. Yeah, when you come to a country, maybe it's a good idea to socialize with the natives. Then you'll find out what's kind of basic. It's basic to have an ID. I used to live stream when I used to go for walks. I'd take my phone and I used to complain too, like, damn, I got to carry my ID. And then when people in my comment section like, you better take your ID, Tim Black. What are you, crazy?
You got a warrant for robbery. Turn around. Turn around. I'm not. Turn around.
I don't got no fucking robbery, man.
Yes, you do.
I don't got no fucking robbery, man.
Turn around.
I ain't robbed nobody, dude. No. Get the fuck away from me, man.
83, send us some other car.
Violation of nothing, man. I swear to God, bro. I swear to God, bro. Get the fuck away from me, man. Get the fuck away from me, dude. Get the fuck away from me.
Taser, now! Get on the ground now!
Please take your ID, Tim. We don't want the cops to shoot your ass.
You think was going to happen, bro?
Because not having ID is just asking for trouble. Because you never know what's going to happen around you. You don't control a cop saying, who the hell are you? Somebody else did something and they might have on the same shorts.
Groves Police Department. Can't walk while black in Groves. Can't walk while being black in Groves. They don't like black people in Groves. Are you detained?
Oh, she's detained for being black and walking in groves.
She was walking on the wrong side of the road. We're trying to tell you guys.
Walking while black in groves. I don't care. Give her a ticket. It ain't gonna stick. Walking while black in groves. Walking while black in groves.
The only thing I don't go through that you go through is the passport thing. But then again, I'm in the U.S. and I was born here. So that's why I don't have one of those. But if I went to another country and they said, you got to carry this or leave, I think I'd carry it.
Sir, hands up. I'm Senator Alex Padilla. I have a question for the secretary, because the fact of the matter is I have a dozen violent criminals that you're rotating on your.
See, folks, what I'm saying is, for every annoying person that's saying horrible things online about immigrants, we got people like this saying dumb things to Americans that totally shoot them all in the foot. I mean, with a Draco. There's no foot left when you are arguing and you're about having to carry your ID. I noticed you said you were going to walk your dog. You know what you did not say? You did not say you were going to pick up after that damn dog. You know, in my neighborhood, I got way too many people walking dogs. They don't bring pooper scoopers, no bag to put their dog's waste in, nothing. Just nice little gifts all around the neighborhood in spots they shouldn't be. You basically told on yourself because you did not include that. That should have been the first thing your ass picked up. Also, you didn't talk. Did you have a leash? Did you have a leash in your hand? I don't remember if I saw a leash. A leash and a pooper scooper thing. Yeah, those are important to have. Important. At the end of the day, if you can't carry an ID, if you can't carry your license, ID, if you can't carry your pass, whatever that is, if it's too much trouble to bring your keys, you ain't built for this. No, you're not built to be here. That's how that works. You're not built for this because we've been having to carry those things forever. Next.
Kofi, follow me.